In this video, we're going to be breaking down 2 hours of Quagmire's darkest ever moments. Let's get started. First up, we got Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, an episode that pushed Family Guy into territory so dark it left viewers questioning whether they were still watching a comedy. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. Glenn Quagmire wakes up one morning looking absolutely terrible. His face is so distorted from lack of sleep that when Peter Griffin opens his front door, he barely recognizes his neighbor. Quagmire's usual confident demeanor has been completely shattered by 3 sleepless nights of horror happening right next door to his house. The reason for Quagmire's exhausted state becomes clear immediately. His sister Brenda is staying at his house with her boyfriend Jeff, and the situation has become a living nightmare. Jeff has been beating Brenda constantly, day and night, for the past 3 days. The sounds of violence and Brenda's screams have kept Quagmire awake, tortured by his inability to protect his own sister from the monster she brought into his home. When Lois Griffin mentions the loud disturbances from the night before, she calls Jeff a monster. Peter agrees, comparing Jeff's frightening presence to something out of a war zone. But the casual way they discuss this violence shows how normalized domestic abuse has become in their neighborhood. Everyone can hear what's happening, yet nobody seems to know what to do about it. Quagmire seeks advice from his friends at the Drunken Clam, their usual hangout spot. He explains the impossible situation he's facing. Jeff beats Brenda continuously, and on top of the physical abuse, the couple constantly demands entertainment from Quagmire. They act like house guests who expect to be waited on while simultaneously destroying his home with violence. The most frustrating part for Quagmire is watching his sister accept this treatment. Brenda won't fight back, won't leave, and won't ask for help. She's become a shadow of the person she used to be, completely broken down by Jeff's constant abuse. Quagmire can see his childhood sister disappearing more each day, replaced by someone who lives in constant fear. When Quagmire asks Peter if Joe Swanson can arrest Jeff, the answer reveals a major flaw in how domestic violence cases are handled. Joe explains that police cannot intervene unless Brenda herself files a complaint. This policy puts the burden on the victim to take action against their abuser, which often doesn't happen because victims are too afraid of making things worse. Brenda's fear of going to the police makes perfect sense when you consider what Jeff might do in retaliation. Domestic abusers often escalate their violence when they feel their control is threatened. Quagmire understands this reality and worries that Jeff might eventually kill his sister. The police policy essentially forces families to wait until it's too late to save their loved ones. Joe suggests an intervention as the only legal option available. He describes it as similar to a surprise party, but instead of celebration, there are confrontational letters and emotional pleas. Peter immediately shows interest, thinking this might be his chance to be the center of attention rather than actually helping Brenda. During the intervention, Quagmire delivers a heartbreaking speech to his sister. He explains how her situation has affected his entire life. The sister he grew up loving has disappeared, replaced by someone who exists only to absorb punishment. His words become increasingly desperate as he tries to reach whatever remains of the real Brenda. Quagmire makes a distinction between a person and a woman in his speech. He describes a woman as someone strong and vibrant, who embraces life and makes choices to improve her situation. By staying with Jeff, Brenda has chosen to make her life worse rather than better. This harsh truth represents Quagmire's frustration with watching someone he loves destroy themselves. The emotional peak of Quagmire's intervention comes when he breaks down crying. Through his tears, he begs for his real sister to come back. He wants the girl he grew up with, not this broken person who lives in constant fear. His vulnerability shows how domestic violence damages entire families, not just the direct victim. Brenda's response to this emotional plea reveals how completely Jeff has broken her spirit. Instead of engaging with her brother's heartfelt words, she dismisses everything with a strange phrase about rolling on. Her detachment from reality shows how abuse victims often dissociate from their emotions as a survival mechanism. The friends mock Brenda's odd language, but their jokes miss the serious psychological damage being displayed. When someone can't respond normally to love and concern from family, it shows how deeply the abuse has affected their ability to connect with other people. Quagmire's frustration reaches a breaking point when he realizes the intervention has failed completely. He knows Jeff will continue beating Brenda after they get married, and the abuse will likely extend to any children they have. The cycle of violence will continue with Jeff's name becoming part of the family legacy. Peter suggests a solution that represents traditional masculine justice, getting a group together to physically confront Jeff. This idea appeals to something primal about protecting innocent people from predators. Joe admits this approach would be satisfying, showing how even law enforcement officers sometimes feel frustrated by legal limitations. The conversation takes a dark turn when Quagmire suggests they should kill Jeff rather than just beat him up. This escalation shows how domestic violence situations can push normally reasonable people toward extreme solutions. When legal systems fail to protect victims, family members sometimes consider taking justice into their own hands. Joe initially objects to murder on legal grounds, explaining that killing someone is wrong regardless of their crimes. As a police officer, he's trained to work within the legal system rather than resort to vigilante justice. However, his position becomes harder to maintain when they witness more abuse happening in real time. The moment that changes everything occurs when they hear Brenda screaming again from next door. Jeff is beating her because she changed the television channel while he was getting a beer. The trivial nature of this trigger shows how abusers will use any excuse to inflict violence on their victims. Jeff's rage over a television channel change reveals the mindset of domestic abusers. They demand complete control over every aspect of their victim's life, no matter how small. Changing a channel becomes an act of defiance that must be punished with violence. The specific shows mentioned in Jeff's rant show how he connects his identity to mainstream entertainment choices. The sound of Brenda's screams and Jeff's shouting breaks down Joe's resistance to violent solutions. Despite his training and oath as a police officer, he can't listen to this abuse continue when legal channels have failed. His decision to join the plan shows how domestic violence can push even law enforcement toward extra-legal remedies. The final confrontation reveals something disturbing about Quagmire's personal life. When Jeff tries to choke him to death, Quagmire survives because he regularly practices this activity on himself. This confession about his private habits shows how the characters in this show often have deeply troubling personal lives beneath their surface personalities. Quagmire's survival and return to confront Jeff represents the moment when someone finally fights back against the abuser. After days of feeling helpless while listening to his sister suffer, Quagmire finally has the chance to make Jeff face consequences for his actions. The tables have turned from Jeff controlling everything to becoming the victim of violence himself. The episode ends with Peter expressing interest in killing more people, showing how violence can become addictive once someone crosses that line. This disturbing conclusion suggests that vigilante justice, while satisfying in the moment, might create new problems and dangers for everyone involved. This story presents domestic violence as a complex problem without easy solutions. Legal systems often fail victims, families feel helpless, and the cycle of abuse continues until someone takes drastic action. The episode shows how abuse damages entire communities and pushes good people toward terrible choices when normal channels for help prove inadequate. Screams of Silence stands as one of Family Guy's most disturbing episodes because it confronts the harsh reality of domestic violence without the show's usual comedic buffer. The episode forces viewers to witness the helplessness that families face when someone they love is trapped in an abusive relationship, and how the failure of legal systems can drive ordinary people to consider extreme measures. While Quagmire's final confrontation with Jeff provides a sense of justice, the episode's darker implications about violence, breeding more violence, leave audiences questioning whether any real resolution was actually achieved. Moving on to Quagmire's dad. The episode begins with what appears to be an innocent scene of Peter helping his son Chris with French homework. Chris is learning basic French vocabulary words, starting with simple terms like fish, dog, and seal. However, this seemingly harmless language lesson quickly becomes something much more uncomfortable when they reach the French word for seal, which is phoque, gros. The pronunciation of this French word sounds exactly like a common English curse word, creating an awkward situation for the family. When Chris correctly pronounces phoque, his mother Lois immediately scolds him for using bad language, not realizing that he's actually speaking proper French. Peter defends his son and shows Lois that the word is genuinely the correct French term for seal. What makes this scene particularly disturbing is how Peter uses this language confusion to his advantage. He encourages Chris to practice using the word in different combinations, knowing full well that it sounds like profanity to anyone listening. Peter has Chris repeat phrases like lazy folk, dumb folk, sick folk, and sick, twisted folk, essentially training his young son to say what sounds like curse words repeatedly. The lesson escalates when Peter adds more inappropriate combinations, including clusterfolk and eventually ugly folk. Peter even adds a picture of a real person to make the insult more personal and cruel. He tells Chris that he can use this word as much as he wants, even at home in front of his parents, because it's French and therefore supposedly classy. Dan Quagmire's secret identity. The main story focuses on Glenn Quagmire's relationship with his father, Dan Quagmire, a decorated war hero and former lieutenant commander. Throughout the episode, there are hints that something unusual is happening with Dan's behavior and appearance. Joe and Peter notice these changes and begin speculating about Dan's personal life through text messages and private conversations. Their speculation centers around whether Dan might be gay, based on his recent behavior and mannerisms. They exchange messages and drawings, trying to figure out what's different about him. However, their assumptions about Dan's sexuality turn out to be completely wrong, leading to a much more complex situation than anyone expected. The truth about Dan becomes clear when Glenn directly confronts his father about his sexuality. Dan denies being gay, which initially seems to resolve Glenn's concerns. However, Dan then reveals something that shocks his son even more than the original suspicion would have. He explains that while he's not gay, he is actually a woman trapped in a man's body. The shocking revelation. Dan announces his plan to undergo gender transition surgery while visiting Quahog. This revelation completely overwhelms Glenn, who had been prepared to accept his father being gay but finds this news much harder to process. Glenn's reaction shows his struggle to understand and accept this major change in his father's identity. The family dynamics become extremely complicated as everyone tries to adjust to this news. Dan chooses the name Ida for her new identity, which becomes important later in the episode. The Griffin family learns about the situation and has various reactions, with some members being more accepting than others. Peter's typical inappropriate behavior continues when he asks direct personal questions about Ida's transition. His lack of social awareness creates uncomfortable moments for everyone involved. The family dinner scene becomes particularly awkward as different family members try to navigate this new situation with varying degrees of success. Brian and Stewie's cruel entertainment. When Brian returns from his seminar, Stewie eagerly shares the news about Dan's transition with him. Both Brian and Stewie treat this personal situation as entertainment, laughing about Quagmire's discomfort and making crude jokes about Ida's appearance and situation. Their reaction shows a complete lack of empathy for what both Ida and Glenn are going through. Brian expresses curiosity about seeing Ida and asks inappropriate questions about her relationships and personal life. Stewie joins in with crude speculations and comments, treating Ida's transition as a source of amusement rather than a serious personal journey that deserves respect and understanding. The conversation between Brian and Stewie reveals their callous attitudes toward other people's private struggles. They discuss Ida's situation like gossip, making jokes and expressing desire to see her just to satisfy their curiosity. Their behavior demonstrates how some people treat transgender individuals as objects of entertainment rather than human beings deserving dignity. The Marriott Hotel encounter. The episode takes an extremely dark turn when it's revealed that Brian had a sexual encounter with Ida at the Marriott Hotel before knowing her true identity. This revelation creates one of the most disturbing moments in Family Guy history, as Brian realizes he unknowingly had relations with Quagmire's father. When Stewie reveals Ida's chosen name, Brian immediately recognizes it from his recent encounter at the hotel. His violent physical reaction, including prolonged vomiting, shows his horror at the situation. Both Brian and Stewie begin screaming in shock and disgust as they process what happened. Brian's reaction reveals deeply problematic attitudes about transgender people and sexual encounters. His extreme disgust suggests he views the encounter as fundamentally different and wrong simply because of Ida's transgender status, rather than focusing on the fact that it was a consensual adult encounter that happened before he knew her connection to Quagmire. The screaming match between Brian and Stewie becomes increasingly hysterical as they try to process the implications of this situation. Brian expresses anger that he wasn't somehow warned or notified about Ida's presence in the area, as if transgender people should be required to announce themselves to prevent such encounters. Family reconciliation interrupted. Meanwhile, Quagmire and Ida work toward repairing their relationship after their initial conflict about her transition. Quagmire apologizes for his selfish reaction and expresses his desire for his father to be happy. This represents genuine character growth as Quagmire tries to put his father's well-being above his own comfort. Ida accepts the apology and explains that she had been unhappy for a very long time before deciding to transition. She acknowledges that her announcement put a lot of pressure on Glenn but stands by her decision to finally live as her true self. Their conversation shows the complex emotions involved in family acceptance of transgender identity. The father-son reconciliation reaches an emotional peak when they embrace, with both expressing love for each other. However, this touching moment is disrupted when Ida notices that Glenn has become physically aroused during their hug. Glenn awkwardly explains that his body can't tell the difference, creating an extremely uncomfortable situation that highlights his inappropriate sexual responses. The relationship bombshell. Just as their relationship seems to be healing, Ida drops another bombshell by announcing that she's met someone special. She describes this new relationship with enthusiasm, explaining how happy this person makes her. Glenn initially responds positively, happy that his father has found love and companionship. However, when Ida reveals that her new romantic partner is Brian Griffin, the situation explodes into chaos. Glenn's horrified scream can be heard from outside the house, showing his complete shock and disgust at learning that his neighbor had intimate relations with his father. This revelation creates a perfect storm of awkwardness, anger, and revulsion. Glenn must now deal not only with his father's transition, but also with the knowledge that someone from his immediate social circle was intimately involved with her. The personal becomes neighborhood drama in the most uncomfortable way possible. Violent confrontation. Glenn's rage over Brian's involvement with his father leads to a violent confrontation at the Griffin house. He storms into their home, demanding to find Brian, calling him names and threatening violence. His anger represents not just personal outrage, but also protective instincts toward his father. When Glenn finds Brian hiding under a bed, he drags him out and beats him severely throughout the house. The violence continues as Glenn punches and kicks Brian repeatedly, threatening to kill him if he ever comes near his house again. This assault goes far beyond what might be considered a reasonable response to the situation. After the brutal beating, Glenn tells Brian to lie there and die before preparing to leave. However, Brian delivers one final insult by crudely stating that he had relations with Glenn's father. This parting shot is designed to cause maximum emotional damage and shows Brian's inability to let conflicts end peacefully. Uncomfortable family dynamics. The episode concludes with Ida trying to integrate into the neighborhood social scene by bringing food to the Griffin family. However, her gesture is immediately rejected when Lois quietly instructs Meg to throw away Ida's homemade crumble in the outside garbage rather than the kitchen trash. This final scene shows how even seemingly accepting behavior can hide rejection and discrimination. Lois appears polite to Ida's face but immediately disposes of her food offering, suggesting she doesn't want any trace of Ida's presence in her home. The instruction to use the outside garbage rather than indoor trash emphasizes the complete rejection. This Family Guy episode presents one of the show's most controversial storylines by addressing transgender identity through the character of Dan Quagmire's transition to Ida. While the episode attempts to show family acceptance and personal growth, it's ultimately filled with transphobic humor, inappropriate reactions, and deeply problematic attitudes toward transgender people. The story combines Glenn's struggle to accept his father's transition with Brian's horrified reaction to unknowingly having intimate relations with a transgender person, creating layers of discomfort and offensive content. The episode fails to treat transgender identity with genuine respect, instead using it primarily as a source of shock value and crude humor, while the violent confrontation and family rejection at the end reinforce harmful stereotypes rather than promoting understanding or acceptance. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Meg and Quagmire. The episode begins with Glenn Quagmire arriving at the Griffin house to celebrate Meg's 18th birthday. He brings her a candle as a gift, making a point to emphasize that this is a very important milestone because she's now legally an adult. Quagmire's behavior immediately becomes inappropriate as he welcomes her to what he calls the adult club. During this birthday interaction, Quagmire places his hand on Meg's leg and lets his pinky finger wander inappropriately. He makes a show of pretending his finger has a mind of its own, asking where it's going and what it's doing. This behavior crosses clear boundaries with a teenager who just turned 18, showing Quagmire's predatory nature toward young women. Peter initially finds Quagmire's advances amusing, laughing about his neighbor hitting on what he crudely calls a skank. However, when Brian points out that Peter is talking about his own daughter, Peter suddenly realizes the serious problem with this situation. His delayed reaction shows how he sometimes fails to protect his family until the danger becomes obvious. Quagmire continues his inappropriate behavior by asking to see Meg without her hat. When he lifts her beanie, something strange emerges from her head that quickly pulls the hat back down. This bizarre moment adds surreal elements to an already uncomfortable situation, but Quagmire remains focused on his pursuit of the newly 18-year-old girl. Family intervention attempts. Stewie tries to protect his sister by physically attacking Quagmire, punching his legs and telling him to stay away from Meg. Despite being just a baby, Stewie recognizes the inappropriate nature of Quagmire's behavior and attempts to intervene. His protective instincts contrast sharply with the adults who seem slower to recognize the danger. Peter becomes increasingly concerned about letting Quagmire take Meg on a date, warning Lois that their neighbor will engage in inappropriate behavior with anyone. To illustrate his point, there's a scene showing Quagmire in their refrigerator in a compromising position, demonstrating his willingness to engage in inappropriate acts anywhere and with anything. The family's concerns about Quagmire's intentions prove well-founded as his behavior becomes increasingly predatory. His reputation for inappropriate sexual behavior makes him completely unsuitable as a romantic partner for the 18-year-old Meg, yet he continues pursuing her despite the family's obvious discomfort. The uncomfortable date. Despite the family's concerns, Meg and Quagmire end up spending time together at what appears to be his cabin. During their date, Meg has a moment of bodily embarrassment when she passes gas, but Quagmire responds in a seemingly understanding way, telling her that bodies sometimes do things they can't control. Their date includes educational activities where Quagmire quizzes Meg on chemistry compounds. She correctly identifies sodium chloride and hydrogen peroxide, impressing Quagmire with her intelligence. However, he then shows her a made-up compound he calls quagmagium, claiming it's the strongest compound on Earth with an atomic weight of awesome. This fake chemistry lesson represents Quagmire's attempt to impress Meg with romantic nonsense disguised as education. The invented compound name combines their names, showing his intent to create a romantic connection. Meg responds positively to this attention, calling him a cutie patootie, to which he responds with equally silly romantic language. Their intimate conversation is interrupted when Peter appears outside with a hose, having heard Meg make cute sounds. His intervention shows his continued concern about protecting his daughter from Quagmire's advances, even going so far as to cool down the situation with water. Parental authority asserted. The situation reaches a breaking point when Peter arrives to take Meg home. He demands that she get in the car and return with the family, but Meg asserts her independence as an 18-year-old adult. She tells her father that he can no longer control her decisions now that she's legally an adult. Peter responds by explaining that while Meg may be an adult legally, she's still his daughter, and he has a responsibility to protect her from what he calls errant wieners. His crude language reveals his understanding of Quagmire's sexual intentions and his determination to prevent his daughter from becoming another victim. Despite her initial resistance, Meg ultimately submits to her father's authority and agrees to leave with the family. Her compliance shows that despite her legal adult status, she still recognizes her father's protective role and authority within the family structure. Lois's direct threats. After Meg leaves with Peter, Lois approaches Quagmire directly to deliver her own warnings about his behavior toward her daughter. She threatens to physically harm him in a very specific and graphic way if he ever touches Meg again, showing that both parents are united in protecting their daughter from his advances. Lois also negotiates some kind of arrangement involving a cabin that she and Peter can use one weekend per month, suggesting she's extracting compensation or concessions from Quagmire in exchange for not pursuing more serious consequences for his inappropriate behavior toward their daughter. She demands that Quagmire not come to their house for at least a month, establishing clear boundaries about his contact with their family. Her direct approach and specific threats show she takes the situation more seriously than Peter's initial amusement suggested, and she's willing to use intimidation to protect her daughter. Private moments continue. Despite the family intervention, the episode reveals that Meg and Quagmire continue their relationship in private. They're shown together in what appears to be an intimate setting, with Quagmire expressing comfort and reluctance to move even for basic needs like using the bathroom. During this private time, Quagmire engages in physical play with Meg, tickling her extensively while she laughs and protests that she can't breathe. This physical interaction crosses boundaries between an adult man and a teenage girl, showing the continuation of inappropriate behavior despite family warnings. Meg calls Quagmire by his first name Glenn during these intimate moments, showing a level of familiarity that suggests their relationship has progressed beyond casual acquaintance. Her comfortable use of his first name indicates she feels close to him, despite the concerning nature of their age gap and power dynamic. Ongoing inappropriate relationship. The tickling scene demonstrates how Quagmire uses seemingly playful physical contact to maintain inappropriate intimacy with Meg. His refusal to stop when she asks him to, even though she's laughing, shows a disregard for consent and boundaries that characterizes predatory behavior. The episode presents this relationship as ongoing, despite parental intervention, suggesting that legal adulthood creates complications in protecting young people from inappropriate older partners. Meg's willing participation doesn't change the problematic nature of a much older neighbor pursuing someone who just turned 18. The comfortable domestic setting and intimate conversation show that their relationship has moved beyond the initial awkward birthday encounter into something more serious and concerning. The episode portrays this development without adequately addressing the inherent problems with such a relationship. This Family Guy episode explores the disturbing scenario of Glenn Quagmire pursuing 18-year-old Meg Griffin immediately after her birthday, highlighting the predatory behavior of an older man targeting a young woman the moment she reaches legal adulthood. While Peter and Lois initially attempt to intervene and protect their daughter, the episode shows Meg and Quagmire continuing their inappropriate relationship despite family concerns. The storyline demonstrates how legal adulthood can create complications for parents trying to protect their children from unsuitable partners, while also showing Quagmire's characteristically inappropriate sexual behavior extending to his neighbor's daughter. The episode presents this relationship without sufficient criticism of the inherent power imbalance and inappropriateness of the situation, instead treating it as another example of Family Guy's boundary-pushing humor, rather than addressing the serious concerns about predatory behavior toward young adults. Moving on to Quagmire's mom. Quagmire's mom. The episode reaches a dramatic moment in a crowded courtroom where Glenn Quagmire faces serious criminal charges. The judge delivers a harsh sentence of 20 years in prison, bringing down his gavel as shocked gasps fill the courtroom. This sentencing appears to be related to statutory rape charges, showing the serious legal consequences that have finally caught up with Quagmire's inappropriate behavior. Just as the judge finishes pronouncing the lengthy prison sentence, a dramatic interruption occurs when an elderly woman bursts through the courtroom doors. The timing of her entrance creates a classic dramatic moment, with her declaring that the sentencing will not proceed as planned. Her sudden appearance surprises everyone in the courtroom. When Quagmire recognizes the woman as his mother, an even more shocking revelation emerges. Every other man in the courtroom simultaneously recognizes her as well, calling out the name Crystal. This mass recognition suggests that Quagmire's mother has had intimate relationships with numerous men throughout the community, creating an awkward situation for her son. The revelation that all these men know Crystal intimately adds another layer of embarrassment to Quagmire's already humiliating legal situation. Having your mother's extensive romantic history exposed in front of a courtroom full of people represents the kind of public shame that would devastate most families. Peter's disturbing defense. Peter Griffin attempts to show support for his neighbor, but his comments reveal deeply disturbing attitudes about the charges against Quagmire. He makes a crude joke about the 20-year sentence, suggesting Quagmire think of it as involving two 10-year-olds instead. This comment shows Peter's complete lack of understanding about the seriousness of crimes against minors. The joke demonstrates how some people minimize or make light of serious crimes involving children. Peter's comment treats statutory rape as something to joke about rather than recognizing it as a serious crime that causes real harm to young victims. His inability to understand the gravity of the situation shows his moral failures as both a friend and a member of society. Brian responds to the situation with his own inappropriate humor, suggesting Quagmire can think about various things while serving his prison sentence. Even though Brian often positions himself as more intelligent and moral than other characters, he also fails to treat this serious criminal matter with appropriate gravity. Absurd legal arguments. When Peter takes the stand to speak on Quagmire's behalf, his testimony becomes increasingly bizarre and inappropriate. He first references a television show to make arguments about when someone is old enough for intimate relationships, completely misunderstanding how legal age of consent works in real life. Peter's reference to fictional television shows as legal precedent demonstrates his fundamental misunderstanding of how the justice system operates. Using fantasy entertainment as the basis for legal arguments about real crimes shows both his ignorance and his inability to distinguish between fiction and reality. His testimony becomes even more absurd when he claims that Quagmire was actually the victim because of his birthday falling on February 29th, Leap Day. Peter argues that this makes Quagmire technically only 12 years old, therefore making him the victim rather than the perpetrator. This ridiculous logic shows how people sometimes create elaborate justifications to avoid accountability. The Leap Day argument demonstrates Peter's willingness to use any technicality, no matter how absurd, to defend his friend's criminal behavior. His creative but completely invalid legal theory shows how some people will go to extreme lengths to excuse inexcusable actions by their friends or family members. Family dynamics and denial. Throughout the legal proceedings, the Griffin family continues their normal daily routines despite the serious criminal case involving their neighbor. Meg asks her mother for money for a school field trip, and Peter responds with his typical inappropriate humor about taking her on field trips. Peter's fantasy about taking Meg to an empty field and abandoning her there shows his ongoing neglect and abuse of his daughter. The imagined scenario where he drives away, crashes, and then begs Meg to save his life while the car explodes represents his selfish expectations that his family will help him despite his terrible treatment of them. This cutaway scene reveals Peter's fundamental selfishness and his expectation that others will sacrifice for him even after he's treated them poorly. His question about why bad things happen to good people, while referring to himself, shows his complete lack of self-awareness about his own moral failures. The victim's revelation. The episode provides backstory about how Quagmire ended up facing criminal charges through a scene with a young woman named Kira. After they have intimate relations, she reveals that she's actually underage, despite having told him she was 23 years old. This revelation explains how Quagmire ended up facing statutory rape charges. Quagmire's response to learning about Kira's real age shows his callous attitude toward the situation. When she points out that he told her he loved her, which was also untrue, he admits that she has a valid point about their mutual deception. However, his lies about love don't carry the same legal consequences as her lies about age. This exchange reveals the complex situations that can lead to statutory rape charges, while also showing Quagmire's pattern of making false promises to young women to obtain intimate relationships. His casual attitude toward both lying to partners and engaging in illegal relationships demonstrates his predatory behavior. Prison preparations and conversations. As Quagmire prepares to serve his prison sentence, various characters offer their perspectives on his situation. Crystal, his mother, tries to provide spiritual comfort by talking about salvation lasting for eternity. Her religious approach to her son's criminal behavior suggests she's trying to find meaning in a difficult situation. Peter's response to Crystal's talk about eternity shows his typical impatience with serious conversations. He complains that their conversation itself feels like it's lasting forever, demonstrating his inability to engage with serious topics or provide meaningful support during crisis situations. The preparation for prison includes practical concerns about what Quagmire can and cannot bring with him. Lois warns him about getting rid of something before entering prison, suggesting there are items or behaviors that would create additional problems for him behind bars. Security failures and ongoing issues. Throughout these events, Peter makes disturbing comments about carrying multiple handguns that weren't detected by courthouse metal detectors. This revelation shows serious security failures in the justice system and suggests that dangerous weapons are present in supposedly secure environments. The failure of security systems represents larger problems with how society handles dangerous individuals in criminal cases. When weapons can be brought into courthouses undetected, it creates risks for everyone involved in legal proceedings, including judges, lawyers, defendants, and witnesses. The surprising resolution. Despite the serious criminal charges and 20-year prison sentence, the episode ends with Quagmire's sentence being commuted or overturned. Peter observes that Quagmire managed to avoid consequences and learned nothing from the experience, expressing satisfaction with this outcome rather than concern about justice for victims. Peter's positive reaction to Quagmire escaping accountability shows his misplaced priorities and lack of concern for crime victims. His happiness that his friend avoided punishment demonstrates how personal loyalty can override moral considerations and concern for public safety. The fact that Quagmire learned nothing from his legal troubles suggests he will continue his pattern of inappropriate behavior toward young women. Without facing real consequences or gaining genuine understanding of why his actions are wrong, he's likely to repeat similar crimes in the future. Ongoing family revelations. Throughout the episode, there are hints about other family secrets and revelations that continue to affect the characters' relationships. Stewie mentions something about Quagmire's ex-husband having a procedure, referencing previous episodes and ongoing storylines about gender transition and family complications. These ongoing revelations show how family secrets and personal transformations continue to create ripple effects throughout the community. The characters must navigate complex relationships while dealing with constantly changing family dynamics and personal revelations. Summary. This Family Guy episode follows Glenn Quagmire as he faces serious criminal charges for statutory rape, ultimately receiving a 20-year prison sentence before having it mysteriously commuted. The story reveals how Quagmire's mother, Crystal, is known intimately by numerous men in the community, creating additional embarrassment for her son during his legal troubles. Peter Griffin provides inappropriate testimony, defending Quagmire using absurd legal theories and disturbing jokes about crimes against minors, while other characters fail to treat the serious criminal charges with appropriate gravity. The episode shows the backstory of how Quagmire ended up facing charges after being deceived about a young woman's age, though his casual attitude toward the situation reveals his ongoing predatory behavior. Despite the severity of his crimes, Quagmire ultimately avoids serving his prison sentence and learns nothing from the experience, suggesting he will continue his pattern of inappropriate behavior toward young women without facing meaningful consequences for his actions. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Quagmire's Quagmire. The episode begins when Glenn Quagmire needs help with his new computer. Peter Griffin and Joe Swanson assist him in picking out the machine, but Quagmire quickly runs into technical difficulties. When he calls Peter for help finding his pictures, something goes wrong and he ends up completely destroying his computer by frying its internal components. With his computer broken beyond repair, Quagmire has no choice but to take it to a repair shop for professional service. At the computer store, he meets Sonia, a clerk who works there. While examining his damaged computer, she discovers the types of adult content that Quagmire had been viewing on his machine. Rather than being disgusted or judgmental about Quagmire's viewing habits, Sonia seems intrigued by what she finds. Her discovery of his preferences leads to a conversation between them, and surprisingly, this interaction results in them agreeing to go on a date together. This meeting seems like a fortunate coincidence for Quagmire, who rarely finds women who share his interests. The first date and its aftermath. During their dinner date, Quagmire and Sonia discover they have much more in common than just their shared interests in adult entertainment. They connect on multiple levels and seem to genuinely enjoy each other's company. The evening appears to be going perfectly, suggesting that Quagmire might have finally found someone compatible with his lifestyle and preferences. However, the next morning brings a shocking revelation about the true nature of their encounter. Quagmire wakes up to find himself handcuffed to his bed, unable to move or escape. Even more disturbing, he realizes that Sonia had drugged him during their date, rendering him unconscious so she could engage in intimate activities without his awareness or consent. Most people would be horrified and traumatized by discovering they had been drugged and assaulted while unconscious. However, Quagmire's reaction is completely different from what anyone would expect. Instead of being upset or concerned about what happened, he becomes convinced that he has finally found his perfect romantic partner and true love. Friends express concern. When Quagmire tells his friends Peter and Joe about his experience at their usual hangout spot, the Drunken Clam, they immediately recognize the dangerous situation he's gotten himself into. Both men caution him to be very careful about continuing this relationship, sensing that something is seriously wrong with Sonia's behavior. Despite their warnings and obvious concern for his safety, Quagmire dismisses their advice and continues seeing Sonia. Their relationship quickly escalates into increasingly extreme and dangerous territory, involving various sexual activities that go far beyond normal boundaries. The situation becomes even more complicated when Sonia's behavior extends to involving other people, including Quagmire's father, Ida. As the relationship progresses, Quagmire's friends notice disturbing physical signs that suggest he's being abused. When he shows up at the Drunken Clam with blackened eyes and other visible injuries, Peter and Joe become increasingly worried about his well-being and try to express their concerns about what's happening to him. The abusive relationship escalates. Rather than acknowledging that he's being hurt or accepting help from his friends, Quagmire dismisses their concerns about his injuries. He refuses to admit that anything is wrong or that he needs assistance, despite the obvious evidence that he's being physically harmed on a regular basis. The situation reaches a dangerous turning point when Quagmire leaves the Drunken Clam after another conversation with his friends. Sonia is waiting for him outside the bar, and her behavior immediately turns violent and threatening. She physically attacks him in broad daylight, beating him while other people could potentially witness the assault. After the beating, Sonia forces Quagmire into the trunk of his own car, essentially kidnapping him. She claims that her violent and controlling behavior is actually fulfilling his fantasies about being dominated and humiliated, using this justification to excuse her criminal actions as she drives away with him trapped in the trunk. The search mission begins. Several days pass without anyone seeing or hearing from Quagmire, which raises serious alarm bells for people who know him. Ida, Quagmire's father, shows up at Peter's house expressing deep concern about her son's disappearance. She explains that it's been days since anyone has had any contact with him, which is highly unusual for someone as social as Quagmire. Joe also confirms that Quagmire has been missing, noting that he failed to show up for their regular activities. The two men had a standing appointment to go apple picking together, and Quagmire's absence from this routine activity confirms that something is seriously wrong with the situation. Realizing that their friend is in genuine danger, Peter, Joe, and Ida decide to take action and search for him throughout Quahog. They begin by checking all of Quagmire's usual haunts and places where he typically spends time, hoping to find clues about his whereabouts or current condition. Exploring the seedy underworld, their search eventually leads them into the darker, more dangerous areas of Quahog that most respectable people avoid. In these seedy back alleys and questionable neighborhoods, they discover that Sonia has a reputation among the local criminal elements and people involved in illegal activities. The information they gather from these unsavory sources points them toward a specific location where Sonia is believed to be keeping Quagmire. Following these leads, they are directed to a storage container in an industrial area, which serves as the location where she has been holding him captive. When they finally locate the storage unit, they can hear muffled sounds coming from inside that confirm Quagmire is indeed trapped within. However, Peter initially misinterprets these sounds, thinking that Quagmire is simply eating and suggesting they should come back later when he's finished with his meal. The dangerous confrontation. Their rescue attempt takes a dangerous turn when Sonia discovers them trying to break into the storage container. She confronts the rescue party and manages to take Joe's service weapon away from him, putting all of them in serious danger. With the gun in her possession, she has the power to prevent the rescue and potentially harm all of them. However, Joe demonstrates remarkable courage and tactical thinking in this crisis situation. Rather than backing down or negotiating with an armed criminal, he calls Sonia's bluff and begins moving closer to her despite the apparent threat to his life. When Sonia pulls the trigger, nothing happens because Joe had deliberately kept his service weapon unloaded as a safety precaution. This decision to maintain an unloaded gun stems from a previous incident that occurred the previous April, showing that Joe learned from past experiences and adapted his safety procedures accordingly. The successful rescue. With the gun rendered harmless, Joe is able to tackle Sonia and subdue her, effectively ending her criminal control over Quagmire and ensuring the safety of everyone involved in the rescue operation. This brave action finally frees Quagmire from his captivity and brings the dangerous situation to an end. After being rescued, Quagmire reflects on his experience and admits that he will need to be the more adventurous partner in his future relationships. His time with Sonia has apparently satisfied his desire for extreme experiences, and he now realizes that he should be the one initiating unusual activities rather than being the victim of them. Strangely, Quagmire also expresses concern about his father Ida potentially being pregnant as a result of the various activities that occurred during his captivity. This unusual worry adds another layer of complexity to the already bizarre situation and shows the far-reaching consequences of Sonia's actions. The teddy bear love triangle. Meanwhile, a completely separate storyline unfolds involving Stewie Griffin and his relationships with stuffed animals. While Lois and the children prepare for Halloween celebrations, she discovers Stewie's first teddy bear named Oscar while going through stored items in their house. Initially, Stewie rejects Oscar because he has grown attached to his current teddy bear, Rupert. However, he soon finds himself conflicted between his loyalty to Rupert and his renewed interest in Oscar, creating an unusual love triangle situation involving stuffed animals and a baby. The situation becomes more complicated when Brian Griffin discovers Stewie playing with Oscar in the attic and participating in imaginary tea parties. Stewie begs Brian not to reveal this secret to Rupert, claiming that his current teddy bear has suicidal tendencies and might harm himself if he learns about the betrayal. Escalating teddy bear drama. The teddy bear situation escalates when Stewie has an apparent fight with Rupert and gives him to Brian in anger. However, while spending time with Oscar, Stewie discovers Brian engaging in inappropriate behavior with the teddy bear, which disgusts him and causes him to reclaim his original companion. The resolution comes when Rupert is forced to choose between Stewie and Brian by falling toward one of them. When the teddy bear falls towards Stewie, he interprets this as Rupert choosing to remain loyal to him rather than staying with Brian. Stewie celebrates his reunion with Rupert, but he worries about how Oscar will react to being rejected again. The storyline ends tragically when Oscar is found having apparently killed himself by hanging, positioned in front of a painting of Stewie, showing the devastating emotional impact of being abandoned. Summary: this Family Guy episode follows two parallel storylines involving unhealthy relationships and dangerous obsessions. The main plot centers on Glenn Quagmire being kidnapped and held captive by Sonia, a sexually aggressive woman who uses violence and drugs to control him, forcing his friends Peter, Joe, and his father Ida to search through Quahog's criminal underworld to rescue him from the storage container where she's holding him prisoner. The secondary storyline involves Stewie Griffin caught in an emotional conflict between two teddy bears, Oscar and Rupert, with Brian Griffin becoming inappropriately involved, ultimately leading to Oscar's apparent suicide when he's rejected in favor of Rupert. Both stories explore themes of obsession, control, and the dangerous consequences of unhealthy relationships, showing how both human and imaginary relationships can become toxic and harmful when boundaries are crossed and consent is ignored. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Cleveland Loretta Quagmire. The episode begins with Peter Griffin inviting his friends aboard his fishing boat to celebrate the boat's one-year anniversary with a party at sea. The group includes Cleveland Brown, Glenn Quagmire, and Joe Swanson, all enjoying a day out on the water with fishing and festivities planned for the occasion. During the fishing activities, Quagmire catches a fish that accidentally lands inside Loretta Brown's shirt. Rather than simply removing the fish herself, Loretta invites Quagmire to reach inside her clothing to retrieve it. This creates an intimate situation where Quagmire's hand ends up between her breasts while he searches for the caught fish. Cleveland approaches during this compromising moment and casually mentions the snacks that Peter has provided for the party. He greets Quagmire in his typical calm and friendly manner before walking away, completely oblivious to what's actually happening between his wife and his friend. His trusting nature prevents him from recognizing the inappropriate contact occurring right in front of him. After the fish is finally removed from Loretta's shirt, she makes a direct proposition to Quagmire for further intimate contact. This bold advance leaves Quagmire amazed and confused, as he hadn't expected Cleveland's wife to be so forward with him. The incident sets the stage for the affair that will soon develop between them. The charades emergency. During a game of charades on the boat, Joe Swanson attempts to act out the name Natalie Wood for the other players to guess. However, his performance goes terribly wrong when he falls overboard into the ocean water. The irony of this situation is lost on most of the group, but Joe finds himself in genuine danger of drowning. None of the friends know how to properly respond to this emergency situation, highlighting their lack of basic life-saving skills. Fortunately, Peter's two Portuguese employees who work on the fishing boat spring into action to rescue Joe from the water using a fishing net and professional techniques. The Portuguese workers successfully pull Joe aboard the boat and perform CPR to revive him, essentially saving his life while the others stand around helplessly. This incident exposes the dangerous gap in emergency preparedness among the friend group and their families. CPR classes and Peter's failure. Following Joe's near-drowning experience, Lois Griffin insists that the entire family take CPR classes to learn proper emergency response techniques. She recognizes that their lack of knowledge could have resulted in tragedy if the Portuguese employees hadn't been present to help. Peter attends the CPR training, but his behavior during the class proves completely inappropriate for the serious subject matter being taught. His inability to treat the life-saving techniques with proper respect results in his CPR certification being revoked almost immediately after receiving it. While Peter considers retaking the CPR course to earn his certification properly, he and Brian Griffin hear loud screaming coming from Cleveland and Loretta's house next door. Concerned that someone might be in danger or need emergency assistance, they rush over to help with whatever crisis might be occurring. The shocking discovery. When Peter and Brian enter Cleveland's house to investigate the screaming, they discover Loretta engaged in intimate relations on the couch with a white man. The couple is so focused on their activity that they don't immediately notice the unwelcome witnesses who have just walked in on them. Peter and Brian can see that the man has a distinctive tattoo on his buttocks, but they leave the house quickly in embarrassment before getting a clear look at his face. Their hasty exit prevents them from immediately identifying Loretta's partner, though Quagmire raises his head from the sofa right after they leave, revealing his identity to the audience. The two men initially agree that the last thing they should do is tell anyone about what they witnessed. However, after supposedly doing everything else in the world in one day, they decide to share the information about Loretta's affair with Lois, the Swansons, and, ironically, with Quagmire himself. Peter's news delivery. Peter volunteers to be the one to tell Cleveland about his wife's infidelity, claiming he has experience with delivering bad news to people. He arranges to meet Cleveland at their usual hangout spot, the Drunken Clam, with Brian accompanying him for moral support. When Peter delivers the news about Loretta's affair, he does so in an overly detailed and graphic manner that makes the situation even more painful for Cleveland. Rather than being tactful or gentle about sharing such devastating information, Peter provides unnecessary specifics about what he witnessed. Cleveland's initial reaction to learning about his wife's betrayal is surprisingly calm and measured, which doesn't match what most people would expect from someone receiving such news. His mild response suggests either deep shock or his characteristic gentle nature, preventing him from expressing anger immediately. Loretta's angry confrontation. When Cleveland calmly questions Loretta about the affair, she responds with anger rather than guilt or remorse. She tells him directly that she needs a real man, essentially criticizing his gentle personality and implying that he's inadequate as a husband and partner. Cleveland maintains his usual mild-mannered response even in the face of her cruel words, actually apologizing to her despite being the wronged party in this situation. His passive reaction disgusts Loretta even further, and she kicks him out of their house, ending their marriage in the most humiliating way possible. The Griffin family offers Cleveland a place to stay in their home, while he deals with the aftermath of his marriage falling apart. However, Lois observes that Cleveland doesn't seem emotionally affected by being kicked out of his house and betrayed by his wife, which concerns her about his mental state. The revenge plan. Peter decides that what Cleveland needs is a revenge lay to help him get back at Loretta and restore his confidence as a man. He approaches Quagmire for advice about how to help Cleveland find someone to have intimate relations with as payback for his wife's betrayal. When Peter and Brian arrive at Quagmire's house, they find him working out while wearing revealing leopard skin underwear. This outfit choice exposes the distinctive tattoo on his buttocks that they had seen on Loretta's mystery partner, finally allowing them to identify Quagmire as the other man. Despite Quagmire's desperate pleas for them to keep this information secret, Peter and Brian immediately tell Cleveland that his best friend was the one having an affair with his wife. Surprisingly, Cleveland shows almost no reaction to learning that his closest friend betrayed him in the most personal way possible. Lois's motivational speech. Lois tries to help Cleveland understand that Loretta wanted him to express his emotions and stand up for himself like a strong man. She explains that women sometimes need their partners to show passion and fight for their relationships rather than accepting mistreatment passively. During her motivational speech about male strength and passion, Lois becomes sexually aroused by her own words. She drops her pants to reveal a pink thong and asks Peter to spank her, showing how the topic of masculine dominance affects her personally. In an awkward moment, Brian becomes caught up in the sexual energy of the situation and smacks Lois's bottom instead of Peter doing it. This creates an uncomfortable silence as everyone processes what just happened and tries to return to the original conversation about Cleveland's situation. Wrestling and escalation. Peter attempts to help Cleveland access his anger by taking him to a wrestling match, hoping that the violent spectacle will inspire some passionate response. However, the wrestling affects Peter much more than it affects Cleveland, who remains emotionally distant from the aggressive display. In a bizarre attempt to provoke Cleveland's anger, Peter puts on a Quagmire mask and inappropriately touches Brian. This strange method finally succeeds in making Cleveland feel some emotion, as he becomes enraged and vows to kill Quagmire for betraying their friendship and destroying his marriage. Realizing that he has pushed his friend too far toward violence, Peter begins to worry that Cleveland might actually harm Quagmire. He decides he needs to protect Glenn from Cleveland's newfound anger by hiding him somewhere safe until the situation calms down. Mayor West's mansion. Peter hides Quagmire at Mayor Adam West's mansion, thinking this will provide safety from Cleveland's threats of violence. However, Mayor West's eccentric and unstable behavior proves too much for even Quagmire to handle, despite his own unusual personality traits. Unable to tolerate the mayor's bizarre antics any longer, Quagmire decides to return home and face the consequences of his actions. He calls Cleveland to offer an apology for the affair and the betrayal of their friendship, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. Cleveland accepts the invitation to meet and arrives at Quagmire's house carrying a baseball bat as a weapon. He chases Quagmire through the house and around the property, clearly intending to use the bat to inflict physical punishment for the betrayal. The final confrontation. The chase ends with Cleveland cornering Quagmire on the front lawn, where he has his former friend completely at his mercy with nowhere left to run. Cleveland raises the baseball bat, prepared to strike Quagmire and exact his revenge for the affair and friendship betrayal. However, at the crucial moment, Cleveland realizes he cannot bring himself to hurt another living person, no matter how badly they have hurt him. His gentle nature ultimately prevents him from committing violence, even when he feels justified in seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Peter tricks Loretta into coming to see Cleveland, hoping they might reconcile their marriage. Instead of getting back together, the couple angrily agrees to divorce each other, but Cleveland Jr. insists on staying with his father rather than his mother. Resolution and boxing match. Cleveland and Quagmire eventually apologize to each other for the pain they've caused, with Quagmire acknowledging his betrayal, and Cleveland accepting some responsibility for his passive role in the marriage's failure. Both men recognize they need to address their anger in a healthy way. At Quagmire's suggestion, they decide to work out their remaining aggression toward each other in a controlled environment by boxing in a proper ring. This allows them to physically express their anger while maintaining their friendship and avoiding serious injury or legal consequences. Summary: this Family Guy episode explores the devastating impact of adultery on friendship and marriage through Cleveland Brown's discovery that his wife Loretta is having an affair with his close friend Glenn Quagmire. The story begins with an innocent fishing trip where Quagmire and Loretta begin their inappropriate relationship, leading to Peter and Brian accidentally witnessing their affair and ultimately telling Cleveland about his wife's betrayal. Despite Cleveland's initially passive response, he eventually becomes enraged enough to threaten violence against Quagmire, though his gentle nature prevents him from actually harming his former friend. The episode concludes with Cleveland and Loretta divorcing, while Cleveland and Quagmire work through their anger in a boxing ring, attempting to salvage their damaged friendship while acknowledging the permanent changes caused by the betrayal and affair. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to I Take Thee, Quagmire. The episode begins with Peter Griffin appearing as a contestant on the popular television game show Wheel of Fortune, hosted by Pat Sajak. Peter has successfully made it through the regular rounds and now faces the final bonus round challenge, which offers the biggest potential prizes for contestants who can solve the puzzle. Pat Sajak explains that the category for the bonus round is Actor and Show, meaning the answer will involve both a performer's name and the television program they appeared in. According to the show's rules, Peter must choose 5 consonants and 1 vowel to help him solve the puzzle. Peter's letter choices prove to be completely unhelpful and nonsensical. He selects the letter Z, the number 4, and the letter Q twice more, and even requests a Batman symbol as one of his choices. These selections demonstrate Peter's lack of understanding about how the game works and his inability to make strategic decisions. Despite having no useful letters revealed on the puzzle board, Peter somehow manages to guess the correct answer: Alex, Karras, and Webster. This incredible stroke of luck amazes both Pat Sajak and the viewing audience, as Peter essentially solved an impossible puzzle through pure chance rather than any logical reasoning. Pat Sajak expresses his disbelief at Peter's miraculous guess, while Peter himself admits that he simply took a random shot in the dark without any real knowledge. His winnings total $1,300, which he can use to select prizes from the show's merchandise showcase. Prize selection confusion. When Peter begins choosing his prizes, his selections reveal his typical confusion about how things work. He picks a ceramic Dalmatian figurine for $600 and mentions wanting a television set, but then chooses 1 week of free maid service and a hat rack instead of the expensive electronics. The most embarrassing moment occurs when Peter asks about the price of that fat guy in the circle, not realizing he's looking at his own reflection in a mirror or monitor. Pat Sajak has to explain that Peter is looking at himself, creating an awkward moment that highlights Peter's lack of self-awareness. After this embarrassing mistake, Peter decides to take the remaining value of his winnings as a gift certificate, rather than continuing to select individual items. This decision allows him to avoid further confusion while still maximizing the value of his game show victory. Family reactions and comparisons. Back home, Lois Griffin compliments Peter on his television appearance, telling him how handsome he looked during his game show performance. Her supportive response shows her willingness to encourage Peter despite his often ridiculous behavior and frequent mistakes. Brian Griffin expresses surprise that Peter actually managed to win anything, given his typically poor decision-making abilities. However, Brian notes that Peter's victory isn't the strangest thing he's seen on a game show, referencing a time when Mayor Adam West appeared on Jeopardy with bizarre results. The flashback to Adam West on Jeopardy shows the mayor giving a completely nonsensical answer about sending someone back to the 5th dimension by saying their name backwards. This reference to Alex Trebek demonstrates the kind of surreal behavior that characterizes Mayor West throughout the series. Stewie's feeding problems. A separate storyline focuses on Stewie Griffin's aggressive behavior during breastfeeding sessions with his mother, Lois. Stewie demands his afternoon feeding in a rude and demanding manner, treating Lois more like a servant than his mother providing nurturing care. During the feeding, Stewie bites Lois hard enough to cause significant pain and possibly break the skin. His new teeth make breastfeeding an increasingly painful and difficult experience for Lois, who struggles to continue providing this natural form of infant nutrition. The situation becomes even more uncomfortable when Stewie coldly tells Lois that he only likes her as a friend, treating their mother-child relationship like a casual acquaintance. This statement shows Stewie's emotional detachment and his tendency to view family relationships in adult terms rather than natural parent-child bonds. Brian's inappropriate offer. When Lois explains her breastfeeding difficulties to Brian, he offers to examine her injuries, claiming he has medical knowledge from watching television shows. His offer to help seems genuine at first, but quickly reveals inappropriate motivations behind his concern. Brian asks Lois to show him the affected area, and she explains that the areola is tender and that one of Stewie's teeth may have bitten down on a milk duct. However, Brian becomes distracted and asks her to repeat what she said, showing his mind has wandered to inappropriate thoughts. Lois continues explaining her pain, comparing her situation to a joke about Alec Baldwin feeding his brothers. This reference attempts to add humor to her genuinely painful situation while highlighting the unusual nature of her breastfeeding challenges with the aggressive infant. Brian suggests that it might be time to wean Stewie from breastfeeding entirely, which Lois agrees would make her life much easier. She thanks Brian for his advice and decides to try stopping the breastfeeding to end the painful biting incidents. However, Brian then reveals his true inappropriate intentions by asking if Lois has any other problems around her underpants that he could examine. He even directly requests that she remove her underwear, showing that his offer to help was motivated by sexual interest rather than genuine concern. Peter's reading struggles. Another scene demonstrates Peter's severe literacy problems when he attempts to read a book while sitting with Lois on their couch. Rather than reading independently, Peter must ask Lois to identify every single word in the text, showing his complete inability to read even simple sentences. The book appears to be about Evel Knievel, the famous motorcycle stunt performer. Peter asks Lois to identify each word individually. Evel Knievel was born in and Montana. After hearing each word separately, he then acts surprised to learn that Evel Knievel was born in Montana. This scene illustrates Peter's inability to connect individual words into meaningful sentences or retain information even when it's spelled out for him word by word. His reading comprehension problems extend beyond simple literacy into basic cognitive processing difficulties. Ocean dolphins conversation. A bizarre cutaway scene features black dolphins having a conversation in the ocean, speaking in urban slang and discussing their daily lives underwater. The dolphins talk about almost drowning, being wet, holding their breath, and having seaweed on their tails. One dolphin plays a prank on another by claiming there's seaweed on his tail, then revealing it was just a joke. The dolphins laugh about the prank and threaten to slap each other with their fins, showing their playful relationship despite the underwater environment. This surreal scene represents the show's tendency to include random, absurd humor that has no connection to the main storylines but provides comic relief through unexpected animal behavior and dialogue. Quagmire's relationship problems. Glenn Quagmire is shown in a relationship with a woman named Joan who displays extremely possessive and threatening behavior. She tells him that if he ever left her, she would cut herself and then cut him, claiming this represents her love for him. Quagmire responds by saying he loves her too, but refers to her as an insane woman whom I'm having second thoughts about. His honest assessment of her mental state shows his growing concern about the relationship, though he tries to maintain politeness. When Joan asks what he said, Quagmire quickly changes his response to avoid confrontation. This interaction demonstrates the kind of dangerous, unstable relationships that Quagmire often finds himself in due to his poor judgment about romantic partners. Cleveland Brown makes an inappropriate comment about whether Quagmire has an erection, adding sexual humor to an already uncomfortable situation. Joan questions whether this is all a joke, showing her confusion about the bizarre interactions happening around her. Peter's paranoid rambling. Peter delivers a paranoid speech to Joan about dangerous things that can happen during ordinary activities like taking walks in the park. He mentions wheelchair ninjas, Nazis, robots made of pots and pans, and dinosaurs that eat human remains. His rambling demonstrates his tendency toward conspiracy thinking and his belief that everyday activities carry extreme dangers. Peter claims these things are reported on the news, suggesting he either misinterprets normal news reports or believes in completely fictional threats. This speech represents Peter's often irrational worldview and his tendency to frighten others with his paranoid theories about dangers that don't actually exist in the real world. Death's concert plans. The character Death appears briefly to mention his plans to attend a Celine Dion concert. He clarifies that he's not planning to kill the singer but will simply watch her perform until she dies naturally on her own. This dark humor plays on Death's role as a supernatural entity while making jokes about celebrity performers and their careers. The comment suggests that watching certain entertainers is so painful it's comparable to death itself. Quagmire's regret and Stewie's criticism. Quagmire expresses regret about a terrible mistake he's made, using his signature phrase, giggity giggity giggity, before admitting his error. This suggests that his relationship with Joan or another romantic encounter has gone badly wrong. Stewie makes harsh comments about breast implants, calling them lies rather than genuine body parts. His criticism shows his judgmental attitude toward cosmetic surgery and artificial enhancement procedures. The episode ends with Meg Griffin expressing confusion about eating something, then getting hit by a watermelon and screaming that she hates everyone. This typical mistreatment of Meg represents the family's ongoing pattern of neglecting and abusing their daughter. Summary. This Family Guy episode presents multiple disconnected storylines, showcasing the characters' various personal problems and bizarre situations. Peter's miraculous game show victory, despite his complete incompetence, highlights his incredible luck combined with his lack of intelligence, while his severe reading difficulties demonstrate his educational limitations. Lois struggles with painful breastfeeding as Stewie's aggressive behavior and new teeth make feeding sessions traumatic, leading to Brian's inappropriate sexual interest in her situation. Quagmire finds himself in another dangerous relationship with an unstable woman who threatens violence, while various cutaway scenes provide surreal humor through talking dolphins and Death's entertainment preferences. The episode combines the show's typical crude humor with character development, showing how the main characters' personal flaws create ongoing problems in their daily lives, relationships, and family dynamics. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have And Then There Were Fewer. The episode opens with Peter Griffin watching Law and Order on television, becoming absorbed in a scene where detectives Lenny Briscoe and Ed Green interrogate a criminal suspect. The detectives claim they have evidence placing the suspect at a crime scene, but when the suspect refuses to talk, they immediately give up and tell him he's free to leave. This creates a bizarre twist when someone dressed as the Scream character jumps out to frighten the suspect as he tries to exit the interrogation room. The scared suspect runs backward, crashes into a chair, and falls over while the detectives laugh at the prank. The person in the costume removes his mask to reveal Jack McCoy, showing that the entire legal team was involved in this unprofessional joke. The detectives congratulate each other on their successful prank, with Jack McCoy explaining that they all needed some humor to make their heavy workload more bearable. Ed Green expresses how much the joke improved his entire week, showing how the legal professionals use inappropriate comedy to cope with their serious responsibilities. After Jack McCoy leaves to return to work, the detectives tell the suspect to put his chair back up so they can watch surveillance footage, returning to their actual police work. This scene demonstrates a completely unrealistic version of how law enforcement operates, mixing comedy with criminal investigation procedures. Peter's crime show obsession. When Lois enters the room, Peter sighs and expresses his wish to be a cool, wisecracking detective like Lenny Briscoe. His fascination with television crime dramas has clearly influenced his view of police work and detective investigations, making him believe that real law enforcement involves constant, clever remarks and dramatic moments. Lois reminds Peter about what happened the last time he became obsessed with Law and Order, triggering a flashback to a previous incident. In the flashback, Lois accidentally drops a jar of peanut butter on the kitchen floor, causing it to shatter and make a mess. Peter immediately appears wearing a detective's trench coat and fedora while holding a magnifying glass up to his eye. He delivers a pun about the floor going nuts, referencing the spilled peanut butter, and looks directly at the camera as the iconic Law and Order theme music plays in the background for several seconds. Back in the present, Peter defends his behavior by praising the show as one of the best crime series ever made. He even salutes Dick Wolf, the show's creator, while an American flag waves behind him, showing his patriotic appreciation for what he considers quality television entertainment. The mysterious invitation. Peter goes outside to check the mail and finds mostly bills and unwanted correspondence, expressing frustration with the usual collection of uninteresting mail. However, his mood changes dramatically when he discovers an unexpected letter that catches his attention and excitement. Bursting into the house where Lois and Brian are sitting on the couch, Peter announces that they've won a weekend vacation at something called the Quinton Stately Mansion. His excitement about this unexpected prize shows how rarely the family receives good news or special opportunities. The invitation explains that Algernon Quinton is opening his mansion for visitors to enjoy for the weekend, promising plenty of what Peter mispronounces as festivities. When Lois corrects him by saying festivities, Peter repeats his mispronunciation, showing his inability to properly read or pronounce common words. Lois sighs at Peter's continued mispronunciation, demonstrating her ongoing frustration with his literacy problems and inability to speak properly even when corrected. Her reaction shows how frequently she must deal with Peter's linguistic mistakes and educational limitations. Brian's skepticism. Brian immediately expresses suspicion about the invitation, warning that this is clearly some kind of scam designed to trick people. His cynical view of unexpected prizes reflects his generally pessimistic worldview and his understanding that most too-good-to-be-true offers usually have hidden catches. He suggests that the letter must be from a corrupt financial company trying to deceive people, advising the family to ignore the invitation entirely. Brian's warning shows his attempt to protect the family from potential fraud or financial manipulation through fake promotional offers. However, Lois dismisses Brian's concerns and expresses genuine excitement about the opportunity for their family to stay in a luxury mansion. Her enthusiasm overrides any skepticism about the legitimacy of the offer, showing her desire for the family to experience something special and different from their usual routine. Lois emphasizes how fun it will be for the entire family to enjoy the mansion's accommodations, dismissing Brian's warnings about potential dangers or hidden motives behind the generous invitation. Neighborhood-wide invitations. The family hears commotion outside and rushes to discover that all their Spooner Street neighbors have received identical invitations to the same mansion weekend. Joe Swanson celebrates enthusiastically about going to a mansion, while Quagmire expresses excitement about his weekend vacation opportunity. Even Herbert, the elderly neighbor, shows excitement about staying at a mansion for the weekend, sharing the news with his dog Jessie. The universal distribution of these invitations suggests either a legitimate community event or a large-scale scam targeting the entire neighborhood. Peter becomes disappointed when he realizes the invitation isn't exclusive to his family, complaining that he never receives anything special that's meant just for him. His reaction shows his desire to feel important and chosen, rather than being part of a mass mailing or community event. Lois tries to cheer him up by emphasizing that staying at a mansion is still an exclusive and exciting opportunity, even if other families will also be there. She reminds him about all the festivities they'll be able to enjoy, attempting to restore his enthusiasm for the trip. Peter's mood improves when he remembers the promised activities, though he continues mispronouncing festivities as fez titties and declares himself a one-man eating machine for these events. His excitement returns despite his continued linguistic errors and inappropriate interpretation of the word. Packing and family dynamics. As the family prepares to leave, Brian continues reading the invitation letter, while Lois supervises the packing process. Peter appears carrying a large collection of stuffed toys that he wants to bring on the trip, showing his childlike attachment to comfort objects and toys. Lois tells Peter he cannot take all the toys because there isn't enough room in the car's trunk. She establishes a limit of only 5 toys, trying to be reasonable about luggage space while still allowing Peter to bring some comfort items. Peter responds with childish whining, insisting he wants to take all 16 of his stuffed animals on the trip. His tantrum-like behavior demonstrates his inability to accept reasonable limitations and his tendency to act like a child when he doesn't get his way. Meg's childhood trauma. Meg points out that she was never allowed to take any toys on family trips as a child, highlighting the double standard in how she was treated compared to how Peter is being accommodated now. Her comment triggers a flashback to her childhood experience with family vacations. In the flashback, 5-year-old Meg gets excited about the family's first vacation and asks if her bunny doll, Mr. Snuggles, can come along. Her innocent request shows a normal child's desire to bring a comfort object on a trip away from home. Lois tells young Meg that they've already discussed the no toys in the car rule, refusing to make an exception even when Meg pleads desperately. The little girl begs to bring Mr. Snuggles, explaining she can't spend a whole week away from her beloved toy, and asking her parents to please make room for him. The dark twist comes when Peter and Lois look at each other and apparently agree to take the toy, but they actually take Mr. Snuggles without taking Meg. The scene shows the parents driving away with the stuffed animal secured in a booster seat while leaving their daughter crying in the driveway. This flashback reveals the extreme neglect and cruelty that Meg experienced as a child, showing how her parents literally chose a stuffed animal over their own daughter when space was limited. The scene demonstrates the ongoing pattern of family abuse that has shaped Meg's life. The final departure. Back in the present, the family prepares to leave for their mansion weekend, with Lois asking if everyone is ready. Peter continues complaining that the trip won't be as special now that all the neighbors will also be there, showing his persistent disappointment about the lack of exclusivity. Lois tells Peter to stop complaining and just enjoy the experience, trying to maintain a positive attitude about their upcoming vacation, despite his negative comments about sharing the experience with their neighbors. The family drives away, but the camera reveals that Meg has been left behind again, standing in the driveway with her luggage still beside her. This repetition of her childhood abandonment shows that the family's cruel treatment of Meg has continued into her teenage years. Meg shouts in frustration and anger, using profanity to express her outrage at being forgotten and left behind once again. Her reaction shows the accumulated frustration from years of being ignored, neglected, and excluded from family activities and vacations. Summary. This Family Guy episode begins with Peter's obsession with law and order, leading to unrealistic expectations about detective work, while the family receives mysterious invitations to spend a weekend at the Quinton stately mansion along with all their neighbors. Despite Brian's warnings that the invitation is likely a scam, Lois's excitement overrides his skepticism, and the family prepares for their trip. Peter's childish behavior about bringing stuffed toys contrasts sharply with the cruel treatment Meg has received throughout her life, as revealed through a flashback showing how her parents once chose to take her toy on vacation while leaving her at home. The episode ends with the family once again abandoning Meg, driving away to their mansion weekend while she stands in the driveway with her luggage, highlighting the ongoing pattern of neglect and abuse that defines her relationship with her family. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have April and Quahog. The episode begins with a local news announcement about Stephen Hawking discovering a new black hole at the edge of the solar system. The Griffin family pays no attention to this scientific breakthrough, treating it as background noise while going about their daily routine. Their indifference to major scientific discoveries shows their typical lack of interest in important world events. Peter walks into the house and alerts his family that he has been called for jury duty. Initially, he feels excited about the prospect of participating in a trial, viewing it as an interesting opportunity rather than a civic responsibility. His enthusiasm stems from his unrealistic expectations about what jury service involves. However, Brian quickly deflates Peter's excitement by explaining that everyone gets called for jury duty at some point in their lives. Learning that jury service is a common civic duty rather than a special honor completely changes Peter's attitude toward the responsibility he's been given. Peter's courtroom disruption. Once Peter realizes that jury duty is ordinary rather than special, he decides he wants to be dismissed from service. He shows up to court with the deliberate intention of being kicked off the jury through disruptive and inappropriate behavior that will make him unsuitable for service. Peter succeeds in becoming a significant problem for the other jurors and court officials through his antics in the courtroom. His deliberate misbehavior demonstrates his selfishness and unwillingness to fulfill basic civic duties when they become inconvenient or boring to him. His disruptive actions in court show how Peter consistently tries to avoid responsibilities through childish behavior rather than accepting his obligations as a citizen. His inability to take legal proceedings seriously reflects his general immaturity and disrespect for important institutions. The apocalyptic announcement. That evening, Peter returns home just as the local news delivers a shocking announcement about the black hole mentioned earlier in the day. The news reports that the newly discovered black hole is continuously expanding and will destroy Earth within the next 24 hours. This apocalyptic prediction sends the entire town of Quahog into panic as residents realize they have less than a day left to live. The announcement transforms what seemed like routine scientific news into an immediate existential crisis for everyone in the community. The impending destruction creates a sense of urgency that drives people to abandon normal social conventions and pursue their deepest desires without concern for consequences. The perceived end of the world removes all barriers to behavior that would normally be considered inappropriate or illegal. Last day chaos. With only 24 hours remaining before the supposed end of the world, various residents of Quahog attempt to fulfill their most forbidden desires and complete their unfulfilled fantasies. The belief that consequences no longer matter leads people to act on impulses they would normally suppress. Herbert, the elderly neighbor, finally attempts to pursue his inappropriate interest in Chris Griffin. His actions represent the kind of predatory behavior that the approaching apocalypse seems to justify in his mind, showing how crisis situations can bring out the worst in people. Quagmire engages in intimate relations with Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, demonstrating how the end-time scenario breaks down normal relationship boundaries and marriage commitments. His actions show how the threat of imminent death overrides respect for friendship and marital vows. Peter decides to steal a lion from the zoo, finally accomplishing something he had previously failed to do. His choice to commit this crime during the final hours shows his priorities and the kind of excitement he seeks when freed from normal consequences. Peter's devastating confession. As the final countdown approaches and the family huddles together in front of their television, Peter makes a shocking confession to Lois about his true feelings toward their children. In what he believes are his final moments, he admits that he secretly hates being in the presence of his kids. This confession reveals Peter's genuine feelings about fatherhood and family life, showing that his frequent neglect and poor treatment of his children stems from actual resentment rather than mere thoughtlessness. His honesty in the face of death exposes the truth about his parental feelings. The timing of this revelation makes it particularly devastating, as Peter chooses to burden his family with this painful truth during what they believe are their final moments together. His decision shows remarkable selfishness, even in the face of universal destruction. The April Fool's revelation. Immediately after Peter's confession, the countdown reaches 0, and the news reveals that the entire black hole story was an elaborate April Fool's Day prank. The supposed threat to Earth was completely fabricated as a cruel joke played on the entire community by the local news station. The revelation that they were never in actual danger makes Peter's confession even more problematic, as his harsh words about his children were spoken under false pretenses. What he thought was deathbed honesty becomes a cruel statement made during a fake crisis. The April Fool's twist shows how media manipulation can create mass panic and drive people to make terrible decisions based on false information. The news station's irresponsible prank has real consequences for families and relationships throughout the community. Children's rejection. After learning about their father's secret hatred, Meg, Chris, and Stewie begin avoiding Peter and refusing to speak to him. Their withdrawal shows the deep emotional damage caused by his thoughtless confession during the fake crisis. The children's reaction demonstrates how hurtful words spoken in supposed final moments can permanently damage family relationships. Even though the apocalypse was fake, Peter's revealed feelings about his children were genuine and deeply wounding. Peter finds himself in the position of trying to win back his children's respect and affection after destroying their trust with his cruel honesty. His attempts to repair the damage show that some words cannot be easily taken back once spoken. Failed bonding attempts. Peter tries to spend quality time with each of his children by discovering their individual interests and hobbies. However, his efforts fail completely because he doesn't actually understand or care about the things that matter to them. His attempts at connection become even worse when he tries to share methamphetamine with Chris, showing his completely inappropriate approach to father-son bonding. This dangerous offer demonstrates how Peter's idea of connecting with his children involves exposing them to harmful substances. The drug-sharing incident reveals Peter's fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate parental behavior and his inability to distinguish between adult recreation and child-appropriate activities. His poor judgment makes the situation worse rather than better. Explanation and continued rejection. Peter attempts to explain to his children that his lack of shared interests with them doesn't mean he loves them any less than other fathers love their children. He tries to separate his personal preferences from his parental feelings in an effort to repair their relationship. However, his explanation fails to convince his children to forgive him for his hurtful confession. They remain unwilling to accept his attempts at reconciliation, showing that some emotional damage requires more than simple explanations to heal. The children's continued rejection forces Peter to realize that his words during the fake crisis have created lasting harm that cannot be easily repaired through conversations or explanations about his true intentions. Buying forgiveness. When emotional appeals fail to restore his relationship with his children, Peter decides to purchase their forgiveness by buying them an Xbox 360 gaming system. His choice to use expensive gifts rather than genuine change shows his approach to solving family problems. The strategy works immediately, as the children's anger disappears once they receive the gaming console. Their quick forgiveness in exchange for material goods shows how family relationships can sometimes be restored through bribery rather than genuine emotional healing. This resolution suggests that the children's hurt feelings were not as deep as initially appeared, or that their desire for the gaming system outweighed their emotional pain over their father's confession. Gaming failure. The episode concludes with Peter playing Call of Duty on the new Xbox 360, repeatedly dying in the online multiplayer mode. His poor performance at the video game shows that despite buying his way back into his children's good graces, he still lacks the skills to truly connect with their interests. His continued failure at the game demonstrates that purchasing the gaming system was more about buying forgiveness than actually developing shared interests with his children. The pattern of his poor gaming performance suggests the underlying relationship problems remain unresolved. Summary. This Family Guy episode uses a fake apocalypse scenario to explore Peter Griffin's true feelings about fatherhood and family relationships. When a local news station announces that a black hole will destroy Earth in 24 hours as an April Fool's prank, Peter confesses to his family that he secretly hates being around his children. After the hoax is revealed, his children reject him until he buys their forgiveness with an Xbox 360 gaming system. The episode examines themes of parental honesty, family dysfunction, media manipulation, and how material gifts can sometimes replace genuine emotional healing in damaged relationships. Peter's confession reveals the authentic resentment underlying his poor parenting, while the resolution through expensive gifts suggests that some family problems are solved through bribery rather than meaningful change or personal growth. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Giggity Wife. The episode begins when Peter Griffin discovers that Joe Swanson has a student identification card that he confiscated from a disrespectful young person who gave him attitude. This discovery gives Peter the idea to use the stolen ID to gain access to places normally restricted to students, opening up new possibilities for the group's entertainment. Peter convinces Joe and Glenn Quagmire to join him in using the student ID to visit Harvard University campus for lunch. The prestigious university setting appeals to their desire to experience something beyond their usual routine, and the fake student status allows them access to campus facilities and student pricing. What starts as a simple lunch visit quickly escalates into a wild night of drinking and partying around the university area. The three friends take full advantage of their temporary student status to explore the college nightlife scene, indulging in excessive alcohol consumption and reckless behavior. Their night of heavy drinking leads to poor decision-making and impulsive actions that will have serious consequences. The combination of alcohol, fake identities, and the excitement of being in a college environment creates the perfect conditions for life-changing mistakes. The accidental marriage. During their drunken night out, Quagmire makes an extremely poor decision while heavily intoxicated. In his impaired state, he accidentally enters into a legal marriage with a prostitute named Charmise, creating a binding legal relationship that he never intended to pursue. The marriage occurs so quickly, and while Quagmire is so drunk that he doesn't fully understand what's happening until it's too late to prevent it, his intoxication prevents him from making rational decisions about such an important legal commitment, showing how alcohol can lead to devastating life choices. When Quagmire sobers up and realizes what he's done, he faces the reality of being legally married to someone he barely knows and who works in an illegal profession. The situation represents one of the most serious consequences he's ever faced for his reckless behavior. Charmise, however, takes the marriage seriously and refuses to simply walk away from their legal relationship. Her attachment to the marriage creates a complex situation where Quagmire must deal with unwanted legal and emotional obligations to someone he never intended to marry. Divorce complications. Quagmire's initial reaction is to pursue divorce immediately, wanting to end the unwanted marriage as quickly as possible. However, Joe warns him about the serious financial consequences that divorce could bring, particularly regarding the division of assets and potential alimony payments. The legal reality of divorce makes Quagmire reconsider his options, as he realizes that ending the marriage could cost him a significant portion of his wealth and property. This financial threat forces him to look for alternative solutions to escape the unwanted relationship. Faced with potentially losing everything he owns in a divorce settlement, Quagmire decides to try making the marriage work rather than risking financial ruin. His decision shows how legal and financial considerations can trap people in unwanted relationships. Lifestyle incompatibility. Quagmire attempts to build a genuine relationship with Charmise, but quickly discovers that their lifestyles and values are completely incompatible. Despite his own questionable moral standards, he finds that Charmise's background and behavior don't meet his expectations for a wife. Her inability to distance herself from her previous lifestyle creates ongoing problems for their relationship. Quagmire realizes that the differences between them go beyond simple personality conflicts and represent fundamental incompatibilities that cannot be easily resolved. The clash between their different worlds shows how economic circumstances, education, and life experiences create barriers that prevent genuine connection between people from vastly different backgrounds. The gay deception plan. When Quagmire shows reluctance to pursue their relationship further, Charmise questions whether he might be gay. Her suspicion gives Quagmire an idea for escaping the marriage without financial consequences, as she mentions that the marriage would be over if he were actually homosexual. Quagmire decides to pretend to be gay in order to convince Charmise to end the marriage voluntarily. This deception seems like a perfect solution that would allow him to escape the unwanted relationship without the financial penalties of divorce proceedings. He begins acting in stereotypical ways that he believes will convince Charmise of his supposed homosexuality. However, his performance lacks authenticity because he's pretending rather than genuinely expressing a different sexual orientation. The deception fails. Charmise becomes suspicious of Quagmire's sudden claim about his sexuality and decides to investigate his behavior more closely. Her suspicions prove correct when she catches him watching heterosexual adult content, proving that his gay identity is completely fabricated. Confronted with evidence of his deception, Quagmire can no longer maintain his fake homosexual persona. Charmise demands proof of his claimed sexuality by insisting that he engage in intimate relations with another man to demonstrate his supposed orientation. This demand puts Quagmire in an impossible position, where he must either admit his deception or follow through with intimate acts that he has no desire to perform. The situation shows how lies can escalate into increasingly difficult and uncomfortable circumstances. Peter's involvement. Desperate to maintain his deception and escape his marriage, Quagmire approaches Peter Griffin for help with Charmise's demand for proof. He asks Peter to participate in intimate relations to convince Charmise that his claimed homosexuality is genuine. Surprisingly, Peter agrees to help his friend, but only on the condition that they go on a proper date first. This requirement shows Peter's belief that intimate relationships should involve some form of courtship, even in fake circumstances designed to deceive someone. Quagmire suffers through an awkward and uncomfortable date with Peter, enduring romantic gestures and conversation that feel completely unnatural to him. The forced date highlights how uncomfortable the entire deception has become for everyone involved. The final test. Back at Quagmire's house, Charmise insists that the two men proceed with intimate relations to prove Quagmire's claimed sexuality. Both Peter and Quagmire approach the situation with extreme reluctance and clumsiness, clearly uncomfortable with what they're being asked to do. Their awkward preparation and obvious reluctance make it clear to anyone watching that neither man has any genuine desire for intimate relations with other men. Their behavior demonstrates that they're acting out of desperation rather than authentic attraction. As they reluctantly prepare to follow through with the charade, both men struggle with the reality of what they've agreed to do. Their discomfort becomes increasingly obvious as the moment approaches for them to consummate their fake relationship. Charmise's decision. Just as Peter and Quagmire are about to engage in intimate relations, Charmise calls off the entire charade. She reveals that she could tell from their behavior that both men are clearly heterosexual and have no genuine attraction to each other. Rather than continuing to force them through the uncomfortable situation, Charmise decides to grant Quagmire the divorce he desperately wants. Her decision shows unexpected compassion and understanding, despite the deception that was attempted against her. She expresses appreciation for the fact that Quagmire treated her with basic decency during their brief marriage, even though he wanted to escape it. Her gratitude suggests that she rarely receives respectful treatment from the men in her life. The embarrassing discovery. After Charmise leaves, Peter and Quagmire embrace in relief that their ordeal is over, both still partially undressed from their preparations for the fake, intimate encounter. Their celebration of freedom from the uncomfortable situation seems private and innocent. However, Peter suddenly notices that Quagmire's laptop camera is active and has been recording their entire interaction. This discovery means that their embarrassing charade has been captured on video without their knowledge or consent. The camera footage creates a new problem, as their private moment of relief becomes potential evidence of behavior that could be misinterpreted by anyone who views the recording without understanding the context. Family reaction. Back at the Griffin house, the family watches the laptop footage and reacts with horror to what appears to be Peter engaged in intimate behavior with another man. Without understanding the context or the deception that led to the situation, they can only see what looks like shocking behavior. The family's reaction shows how easily situations can be misunderstood when people lack the full context of events. What was actually an elaborate deception to escape an unwanted marriage appears to be something completely different to outside observers. The episode ends with this misunderstanding, leaving Peter to deal with his family's shock and confusion about what they witnessed on the laptop recording. Summary. This Family Guy episode follows Glenn Quagmire's attempts to escape an accidental marriage to a prostitute named Charmise after a drunken night at Harvard University using a stolen student ID. When divorce threatens his financial security, Quagmire pretends to be gay to convince Charmise to end the marriage voluntarily, but she demands proof by requiring him to have intimate relations with another man. Peter Griffin agrees to help with this deception, leading to an awkward fake date and preparations for intimate contact that are interrupted when Charmise recognizes their obvious discomfort and grants the divorce anyway. The episode explores themes of deception, unwanted relationships, financial consequences of marriage, and how situations can be misunderstood without proper context, ending with the Griffin family witnessing what appears to be inappropriate behavior between Peter and Quagmire through a laptop camera they didn't realize was recording. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Quagmire's baby. Peter buys an old ham radio from Quagmire for $50. He thinks the price is too high and complains about being ripped off. Peter has been playing with the radio for 7 weeks, but can barely get any stations to work properly. Lois tells Peter he needs to take a shower because he has been messing with the radio for so long. The only station Peter can hear clearly has British men reading news from places with weird names that might not be real countries. The British announcers talk about made-up places and events that sound fake. They mention sports scores using silly words and strange time announcements. Peter does not understand that these broadcasts are not real news. The fake president call. Peter tries to use his ham radio to talk to ghosts. When someone answers, the person says he is Ronald Reagan, the former president. Peter gets very excited and thinks he is really talking to the dead president. Peter calls Quagmire right away to tell him about talking to Ronald Reagan. He is very proud and thinks this is amazing. But Quagmire and Joe figure out that Peter is not really talking to Reagan. The voice is actually Rich Little, a man who copies famous people's voices. Rich Little has been tricking Peter by pretending to be Reagan on the radio. When Peter learns this, he feels stupid and angry about being fooled. Stewie makes a clone. Stewie creates a copy of himself to do boring work he does not want to do. He calls this copy Bitch Stewie and treats him like a servant. The clone is not as smart as the real Stewie and does whatever he is told. Stewie feeds the clone cheap peanut paste and makes him do simple tasks. Brian finds them taking a bath together, with the clone washing Stewie's back. Brian thinks this is very weird and uncomfortable. The clone is very happy and friendly, but not very smart. He does not understand jokes and talks in a simple way. Stewie enjoys having someone to boss around and do his work for him. Quagmire gets a baby. When Peter goes to Quagmire's house to get his money back for the broken radio, he sees a baby in a basket. The baby comes with a note saying she is Quagmire's daughter and telling him to use protection next time. The baby says giggity, which is Quagmire's favorite word. This proves the baby is really his daughter. DNA tests confirm that Quagmire is the father, so he has to take care of her. Lois gives Quagmire baby supplies and tells him how to care for a baby, but Quagmire has no idea how to be a father. He talks to the baby like she is an adult roommate instead of a child who needs care. Quagmire names the baby Anna Lee, but says he will call her Anal for short. He thinks this is funny, but it shows he is not taking fatherhood seriously. Brian wants a clone too. Brian sees how helpful Stewie's clone is and asks for one too. Stewie says he will make one, but first Brian has to do weird things with his tail. Stewie makes Brian touch and rub his tail in strange ways. Brian does not want to do these things but agrees because he wants a clone to help him. Stewie makes him smile and lick his lips while touching his tail, which makes Brian very uncomfortable. When Stewie finally makes Bitch Brian, the clone is much worse than expected. He has a huge jaw and is very stupid. The clone cannot do simple tasks and causes more problems than he helps with. Bitch Brian cannot use the bathroom alone and does dumb things like hitting Brian's car with a rock instead of washing it. He is more like a broken toy than a helpful assistant. Quagmire struggles with parenting. Taking care of a baby is much harder than Quagmire thought it would be. Anna Lee keeps him awake every night crying, and he gets very tired. His normal lifestyle of dating women gets ruined because he has to watch the baby. Quagmire asks Peter and Lois to adopt Anna Lee because he cannot handle being a father. They say no because they already have too many kids. Peter even suggests killing the baby, which shows he does not understand how babies work. Nobody wants to help Quagmire take care of his daughter. He realizes he cannot party and date like before because babies need constant attention and care. The clones break down. Both clones start falling apart quickly. Bitch Stewie's eye hangs out and he cannot walk properly. Bitch Brian's jaw falls completely off his face. Stewie explains that the clones are not stable and will dissolve soon. The clones turn into puddles on the floor and disappear completely. This ends the experiment and shows that trying to clone yourself does not work. Brian realizes he needs to clean up the mess, which gives him more work instead of less. Brian also lost his dry cleaning ticket because Bitch Brian took it before dissolving. The failed clone experiment created more problems than it solved. Giving up the baby. Quagmire decides to give Anna Lee to an adoption agency because he cannot be a good father. He takes her to the agency with Peter and Joe to get help with the paperwork. At the agency, Quagmire tells them he wants to give up his baby because having her is not working out. When the worker tries to take Anna Lee, the baby reaches out to Quagmire and smiles at him. This makes Quagmire feel sad and unsure about his decision, but he gives her to the agency anyway, asking them to make sure she goes to a good family and stays safe. Feeling bad about his choice, Quagmire goes to a strip club with Peter and Joe to celebrate being free from taking care of a baby. But everything at the club reminds him of Anna Lee. The strippers look like his baby in different ways. He cannot enjoy himself because he keeps thinking about his daughter. Quagmire starts crying and says he made a terrible mistake by giving away his only child. He runs out of the club feeling very sad. Finding Anna Lee, Quagmire decides he wants his daughter back and finds the house where she was adopted. When he looks through the window, he sees Anna Lee playing happily with her new family. They look like a real family that loves each other. Quagmire realizes that Anna Lee is better off with this family than with him. They can give her the love and care she needs. Even though it makes him sad, he decides not to take her back. Peter and Joe have to shout their conversation to Joe, who cannot get up the steps to the house because of his wheelchair. They describe what they see inside while Joe waits outside, letting her go. Quagmire decides that what is best for Anna Lee is more important than what he wants. The new family can give her a good home and proper care. He chooses to let her stay with them instead of taking her back. Peter tells Quagmire he did the right thing by thinking about what is best for his daughter. Quagmire agrees that this family is Anna Lee's real home now, and he needs to let her go. As they walk away, Quagmire jokes that maybe he will meet her again in 18 years when she is an adult. This shows he has not really changed his inappropriate behavior and is still thinking about women in the wrong way. Summary. This Family Guy episode follows multiple storylines involving Peter's broken ham radio, Stewie's failed cloning experiment, and Quagmire becoming an unexpected father. Peter gets tricked by an impersonator pretending to be Ronald Reagan on his ham radio, while Stewie creates clones of himself and Brian that quickly fall apart and dissolve. The main story focuses on Quagmire, discovering he has a baby daughter named Anna Lee and struggling with the responsibilities of fatherhood. After giving her up for adoption and immediately regretting it, Quagmire finds her new family and decides to let her stay with them because they can provide better care than he can. The episode explores themes of responsibility, parenting, and making difficult decisions for the benefit of others rather than yourself. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Hard-Boiled Meg. Meg Griffin tries to make money by hustling pool at local bars and pool halls, but she has no success getting anyone to play against her. Her attempts to challenge people to games fail completely, showing her lack of skill at both pool and convincing others to bet against her. Despite her failures at hustling, Meg catches the attention of a handsome young man named Seymour who approaches her. He is attractive and shows interest in spending time with her, which excites Meg because she rarely receives attention from boys or men. Seymour asks Meg to take him home, and she agrees immediately. She is thrilled that someone good-looking wants to spend time with her, as this almost never happens in her life. The attention from an attractive person makes her feel special and wanted. However, their night together takes a dangerous turn when Seymour decides to rob a convenience store. He commits the crime while Meg waits outside, not knowing what he plans to do until it happens. When he runs back to the car after stealing money, Meg has to drive fast to escape from the police. The crime spree begins. During their escape from the convenience store robbery, Meg successfully outdrives the police and helps Seymour get away with his crime. Her driving skills surprise both of them, and she feels proud of being useful in their criminal activity. The excitement of the robbery and successful escape gives both Meg and Seymour an adrenaline rush. They decide to commit another robbery the following night, planning to target a bigger store with more money to steal. Meg becomes attracted to the dangerous lifestyle and the attention Seymour gives her. She enjoys feeling important and needed, even though their relationship is based on criminal activity that could get them both arrested and sent to prison. Their plan for the second night involves robbing a large department store, which would be much more serious than stealing from a small convenience store. The bigger target means more money, but also greater risk of getting caught by police. Chris discovers the plan. Chris Griffin overhears Meg and Seymour discussing their plan to rob the department store. He becomes worried about his sister getting involved in serious criminal activity that could ruin her life and land her in prison. Chris tries to talk Meg out of participating in the robbery, warning her about the dangers and consequences of committing major crimes. He understands that she could face years in prison if caught, and he wants to protect her from making such a terrible mistake. However, Meg ignores Chris's warnings and advice completely. She is too caught up in the excitement of her relationship with Seymour and the thrill of criminal activity to listen to her brother's concerns about her safety and future. Her refusal to listen to Chris shows how the attention from Seymour has clouded her judgment. She values the temporary excitement and feeling of being wanted more than her long-term safety and well-being. The department store heist. Despite Chris's warnings, Meg and Seymour go through with their plan to rob the department store. They successfully steal money and merchandise from the store, continuing their crime spree and avoiding immediate capture by police. During their escape from the department store robbery, Meg begins to question whether Seymour really cares about her or if he is just using her driving skills for his criminal activities. She wonders if their relationship is based on genuine feelings or just convenience. When Meg asks Seymour directly if he is using her, he responds by confessing his love for her. This declaration makes Meg feel happy and validated, as she believes she has found someone who truly cares about her despite their criminal activities. However, their romantic moment is interrupted when a police officer appears and shoots Seymour. The sudden violence shows the real dangers of their criminal lifestyle and how quickly things can turn deadly during police confrontations. The crash and reality check. After Seymour gets shot, Meg panics and presses hard on the car's accelerator to escape from the police. Her desperate attempt to flee the scene leads to a high-speed chase that puts both of them in even greater danger. The chase ends when Meg crashes into another car being driven by Peter Griffin, who is borrowing Quagmire's vehicle. The collision brings their crime spree to a sudden and violent end, showing how criminal activities often result in harm to innocent people. The crash serves as a harsh return to reality for Meg, as her fantasy relationship with Seymour comes to an abrupt and painful conclusion. The excitement and romance of their criminal partnership ends with violence, injury, and consequences for everyone involved. Quagmire's virtual reality problem. Meanwhile, a separate storyline involves Peter, Joe, and Quagmire discovering a new virtual reality parlor in town. They decide to try the new technology together, curious about what virtual reality experiences might offer them. The virtual reality experience affects Quagmire in an unexpected way, giving him a severe case of hiccups that will not stop. The hiccups continue long after he leaves the virtual reality parlor, becoming a constant and annoying problem. Quagmire's friends try various traditional methods to cure his hiccups, including attempting to scare him. However, none of their home remedies work, and the hiccups continue to plague him day and night without relief. When medical and religious interventions also fail to cure Quagmire's hiccups, he becomes desperate for a solution. The constant hiccuping makes it impossible for him to sleep, eat, or function normally in his daily life. Quagmire's desperate request. After exhausting all conventional treatments for his hiccups, Quagmire visits Dr. Hartman for medical help. However, even professional medical treatment fails to provide relief from his persistent hiccuping problem. Quagmire also seeks help from a religious leader, hoping that spiritual intervention might cure his condition. But religious methods also prove unsuccessful, leaving him without any hope for relief from his constant hiccuping. In his desperation, Quagmire approaches Peter with an extreme request. He begs Peter to kill him, believing that death is the only way to end his suffering from the non-stop hiccups that have made his life unbearable. Peter agrees to help Quagmire end his life, and Quagmire makes him promise not to change his mind or back out of their agreement. The severity of Quagmire's suffering makes him willing to choose death over continuing to live with constant hiccups. The unexpected cure. Before Peter can carry out his promise to kill Quagmire, something unexpected happens while Quagmire is saying goodbye to his beloved cat. The cat scratches him during their farewell, and the sudden shock of being scratched instantly cures his hiccups. Quagmire is overjoyed to discover that his hiccups have finally stopped after weeks of constant suffering. The simple scratch from his cat accomplished what medical professionals and religious leaders could not achieve. However, before Quagmire can tell Peter the good news about being cured, Peter kidnaps him according to their previous agreement. Peter believes he is still obligated to kill Quagmire and does not know that the hiccups have been cured. Peter puts the now cured Quagmire in the trunk of his car, planning to follow through with their agreement despite the fact that it is no longer necessary. The timing creates a dangerous misunderstanding that could result in unnecessary harm. The truth about Meg's adventure. Chris finds Meg after her supposed crime spree and reveals a shocking truth about her recent experiences. He explains that she never actually went on any robberies with Seymour, and that the entire criminal adventure was a product of her imagination. The revelation that Meg imagined her entire relationship with Seymour and their criminal activities shows that she was experiencing some form of mental health episode or hallucination. Her desperate desire for attention and excitement led her to create an elaborate fantasy. Chris takes Meg's place in the stolen car and tells Peter that he was the one who stole it, protecting his sister from getting in trouble for crimes she did not actually commit. His protective action shows his love for Meg despite her recent strange behavior. Back at home, Meg continues to fantasize about Seymour and their romantic relationship, unable to distinguish between her imaginary experiences and reality. Her continued delusions suggest that her mental state has not improved. The real cause of Meg's delusions. The episode reveals that Meg's vivid hallucinations and false memories about Seymour were caused by E. coli bacteria from contaminated mustard she consumed. The bacterial infection affected her brain and caused her to experience detailed fantasies that seemed completely real to her. This medical explanation for Meg's behavior shows how food poisoning can sometimes cause serious mental symptoms, including hallucinations and false memories. Her brain created an elaborate fantasy to cope with her illness and her deep desire for romantic attention. The contaminated mustard that caused Meg's illness represents the random and sometimes dangerous nature of food safety issues. What seemed like a simple condiment ended up causing serious mental health symptoms that could have led to real criminal behavior. Seymour's real identity. In a final twist, the episode reveals that Seymour actually exists but was participating in a Family Guy simulation at the virtual reality parlor. He was experiencing his own version of the events that Meg imagined, suggesting that virtual reality can create shared or parallel experiences. When Seymour finishes his Family Guy simulation, he immediately asks to try a Bob's Burgers simulation, showing his interest in experiencing different fictional worlds through virtual reality technology. His enthusiasm for these simulations suggests that virtual reality offers exciting entertainment possibilities. The revelation that Seymour was real, but in a different virtual reality experience, creates questions about the nature of reality and imagination in the modern world. Technology allows people to experience detailed fictional scenarios that can feel as real as actual events. The intersection of reality and fantasy. The episode explores themes about the difference between reality and fantasy, showing how both Meg and Seymour experienced vivid scenarios that felt real but were actually artificial. Meg's experience was caused by illness, while Seymour's was created by technology. Both characters found escape from their regular lives through these alternate experiences, whether caused by bacterial infection or virtual reality simulation. Their parallel but separate adventures highlight how people seek excitement and meaning through fantasy when reality feels insufficient. The story suggests that modern life creates conditions where people become confused about what is real and what is imaginary. Technology, illness, and psychological needs can all create experiences that feel authentic but are actually false or artificial. Summary: this Family Guy episode presents parallel storylines about reality versus fantasy, following Meg's imagined crime spree with a fictional boyfriend named Seymour, while Quagmire suffers from persistent hiccups after a virtual reality experience. Meg's entire criminal adventure turns out to be a hallucination caused by E. coli poisoning from contaminated mustard, while Quagmire's hiccups are cured by his cat Scratch just before Peter attempts to kill him as promised. The episode reveals that Seymour actually existed but was participating in a Family Guy simulation at the virtual reality parlor, creating questions about the nature of reality and imagination in modern life. Through these interconnected stories, the episode explores themes of escapism, mental health, technology's impact on perception, and how people seek meaning and excitement through fantasy when reality feels inadequate or disappointing. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Airport 07. The episode begins when Peter Griffin attends a redneck comedy show that inspires him to completely change his lifestyle. After watching the performance, he becomes fascinated with what he perceives as redneck culture and decides to adopt this identity for himself. Peter's first step in his transformation involves purchasing a pickup truck, which he sees as an essential element of redneck culture. The truck becomes his symbol of his new identity and the foundation for all his subsequent behavior changes. Once he has his truck, Peter begins engaging in what he considers typical redneck activities. He moves the family couch from inside the house onto the front lawn, treating outdoor furniture as normal living space. This action shows his misunderstanding of economic necessity versus lifestyle choice. Peter's behavior becomes increasingly inappropriate as he makes sexual advances toward his own daughter Meg, believing this represents redneck behavior. His actions demonstrate a disturbing misinterpretation of rural culture based on harmful stereotypes rather than understanding real people. He also takes up chewing tobacco as part of his redneck persona, adding this unhealthy habit to his repertoire of new behaviors. The tobacco use represents another superficial adoption of what he thinks characterizes rural American culture. The airport incident. Peter's redneck phase leads to a serious incident when he needs to drive Quagmire to the airport. During this trip, Peter makes a catastrophically poor decision that will have lasting consequences for his friend and neighbor. While at the airport, Peter notices Quagmire's airplane and becomes convinced that airplane fuel will make his pickup truck capable of flight. This absurd logic demonstrates Peter's complete lack of understanding about how vehicles and fuel systems work. Acting on this ridiculous belief, Peter steals fuel from Quagmire's plane, draining the aircraft's tanks to put aviation fuel into his truck. He apparently believes that using airplane fuel will give his truck the ability to fly like an aircraft. The theft of the airplane fuel creates a dangerous situation when Quagmire attempts to take off in his plane. Without adequate fuel, the aircraft crashes, creating a serious aviation accident that could have resulted in death or severe injury. Quagmire's job loss and housing crisis. The plane crash caused by Peter's fuel theft results in Quagmire losing his job as a pilot. The aviation industry takes safety violations very seriously, and the crash ends Quagmire's professional flying career immediately. After losing his job, Quagmire quickly finds himself in financial trouble and unable to afford his own housing. Within 3 weeks of the incident, he becomes homeless and must rely on Peter for shelter, despite Peter being responsible for his predicament. Initially, Peter allows Quagmire to live in the family's treehouse, which provides basic shelter but lacks the amenities needed for comfortable adult living. The treehouse arrangement represents a temporary solution that cannot work long-term. Eventually, Quagmire moves from the treehouse into the Griffin family home itself. This living arrangement creates significant stress for the entire family, particularly because of Quagmire's inappropriate sexual behavior and lack of boundaries. Inappropriate household behavior. During his stay with the Griffin family, Quagmire continues exhibiting his typical sexual fetishes and inappropriate behaviors. His conduct makes everyone in the household uncomfortable and creates an unsustainable living situation. One particularly disturbing incident involves Quagmire putting his foot into Meg's mouth while she sleeps. This violation of personal boundaries and assault on a minor demonstrates the serious problems with having Quagmire as a house guest. His sexual misconduct extends beyond this single incident, creating a pattern of inappropriate behavior that makes the family feel unsafe in their own home. The situation becomes increasingly intolerable for everyone involved. Lois reaches her breaking point with Quagmire's behavior and demands that Peter take action to remove him from their house. She refuses to continue tolerating the sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct that Quagmire brings into their home. The rescue plan. Under pressure from Lois to solve the problem he created, Peter develops a plan to help Quagmire recover his career and independence. He enlists the help of Joe Swanson and Cleveland Brown to execute what he describes as a complex scheme. The plan involves multiple steps and requires coordination between Peter, Joe, and Cleveland. However, the details of their scheme prove problematic, and the plan begins to fall apart before it can succeed in helping Quagmire. Just when their rescue attempt appears to be failing completely, they receive unexpected assistance from Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine. Hefner provides inspirational advice that gives Quagmire the motivation he needs to take action. Hefner's guidance helps Quagmire find the confidence and determination to solve his own problems rather than relying entirely on his friend's help. The advice serves as a catalyst for Quagmire to take control of his situation. Quagmire's redemption. Inspired by Hugh Hefner's advice, Quagmire manages to save the day in whatever crisis situation Peter's plan has created. His successful intervention demonstrates that he still possesses the skills and abilities that made him a competent pilot. Quagmire's heroic actions prove to his former employers that he remains capable and trustworthy despite the previous accident. His performance during the crisis convinces them that the plane crash was an isolated incident rather than a pattern of poor judgment. As a result of proving himself during the emergency situation, Quagmire successfully regains his pilot's license and gets his job back. The aviation company recognizes that he was not truly at fault for the original crash and restores his employment. With his job restored, Quagmire can once again afford his own housing and move out of the Griffin family home. His return to independence resolves the uncomfortable living situation and restores normal boundaries between the families. Resolution and consequences. The episode concludes with Quagmire's successful return to his career and independent living situation. However, the experience has likely damaged his friendship with Peter, who caused the entire crisis through his reckless behavior. Peter's redneck phase ends without him learning any meaningful lessons about cultural sensitivity or personal responsibility. His stereotypical portrayal of rural culture and the serious consequences of his actions receive little reflection or growth. The Griffin family returns to their normal routine after Quagmire moves out, but the experience of having him as a house guest has created lasting trauma, particularly for Meg, who was assaulted while sleeping. While Quagmire recovers his career, the incident serves as a reminder of how quickly professional accomplishments can be lost due to circumstances beyond one's control, and how difficult it can be to rebuild after such setbacks. Summary. This Family Guy episode follows Peter's adoption of a redneck persona after attending a comedy show, leading him to steal airplane fuel from Quagmire's plane in the mistaken belief it will make his truck fly. The resulting plane crash costs Quagmire his pilot job and forces him to live with the Griffin family for 3 weeks, during which he exhibits inappropriate sexual behavior, including assaulting Meg while she sleeps. Under pressure from Lois to resolve the situation he created, Peter develops a rescue plan with Joe and Cleveland that nearly fails until Hugh Hefner provides inspirational advice that motivates Quagmire to save the day and regain his job. The episode explores themes of cultural stereotyping, personal responsibility, and the serious consequences that can result from thoughtless actions, while also depicting disturbing sexual misconduct that creates lasting trauma for the victims. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Meet the Quagmires. Peter Griffin listens to Quagmire bragging about his many sexual adventures and romantic conquests at the Drunken Clam. These stories make Peter feel like he missed out on experiencing the single lifestyle before getting married to Lois, causing him to regret settling down so early. Death appears at the bar on what turns out to be a false alarm, but while he's there, Peter asks him for a favor. Peter wishes he could go back in time to experience being single again, and Death agrees to grant this request by sending him back to 1984 for one night. Death also sends Brian back in time with Peter to keep him company during his trip to the past. When they arrive in 1984, other people see Peter as his 18-year-old self, even though he retains his adult memories and personality. In 1984, Peter has a scheduled movie date with young Lois, but he decides to cancel their plans. Instead, he accepts an invitation from Cleveland to go out partying at a local bar, choosing the single lifestyle over his commitment to Lois. The night out and its consequences. Peter enjoys his evening at the bar, dancing and having fun as a single man. During the night, he makes out with actress Molly Ringwald, experiencing the kind of romantic adventure he felt he had missed during his youth. When Death appears to bring Peter back to the present day, Peter feels satisfied with his night of freedom. However, upon returning to his own time, he discovers that his actions in the past have completely changed the world around him. Peter learns that he has been married to Molly Ringwald for 20 years instead of Lois. Meanwhile, Lois married Quagmire after Peter stood her up for their movie date. These relationship changes have created a completely different timeline. The altered world also shows other major differences. Chevy Chase hosts The Tonight Show instead of the usual host, and Al Gore serves as President of the United States. These changes suggest that Peter's actions created a butterfly effect that influenced many aspects of society. The Better World Dilemma. Despite Peter's personal unhappiness with the changes, the world appears to be in much better condition without his marriage to Lois. The alternate timeline seems more peaceful and prosperous, suggesting that some changes were actually beneficial for society. However, Peter cannot accept living without Lois and his original family, even if the world is objectively better. He begs Death to send him back to 1984 again so he can fix his mistake and restore his original timeline. Death agrees to give Peter another chance to correct his actions in the past. Peter returns to 1984, determined to keep his date with Lois instead of going out with Cleveland to party at the bar. Repeated failures and attempts. Despite his determination to fix things, Peter repeatedly makes the same mistakes when he returns to 1984. He continues choosing the party lifestyle over his commitment to Lois, failing to learn from his previous errors. Peter keeps asking Death for more chances to get things right, but he continues making poor decisions that prevent him from keeping his date with Lois. His repeated failures show his difficulty in changing his behavior even when he knows the consequences. Eventually, Death refuses to give Peter any more opportunities to fix his mistakes. Peter has blown multiple chances and must live with the consequences of his repeated poor choices about prioritizing immediate pleasure over long-term commitment. After Peter misses their date again, Lois becomes upset and disappointed with his unreliability. Her frustration shows that his repeated cancellations have damaged her trust and feelings toward him. The country club intervention. Peter and Brian sneak into a country club dance where they hope to prevent Quagmire from kissing Lois, which would cause her to fall in love with him instead of Peter. They realize that stopping this specific moment is crucial to restoring the original timeline. When Lois tells Peter that he had his chance with her and wasted it, he almost gives up on trying to win her back. Her rejection makes him realize how badly he has damaged their potential relationship through his unreliable behavior. Brian notices that a photograph of Stewie, Chris, and Meg is fading away, showing that Peter's children are disappearing from existence. This visual proof of the consequences motivates both of them to take more decisive action. Realizing he needs to demonstrate his true feelings, Peter punches Quagmire and kisses Lois passionately. This dramatic gesture shows Lois that he is serious about their relationship and willing to fight for her love. The proposal and performance. After his passionate display, Peter asks Lois to marry him, and she accepts his proposal. This moment restores their romantic relationship and sets the timeline back toward its original course. Brian performs Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up at the dance, entertaining the crowd with his singing. His performance goes well until he attempts a long note that shocks and surprises the audience with its intensity. The musical performance serves as entertainment during Peter and Lois's reconciliation, providing a lighthearted moment after the dramatic events of their relationship crisis. Return to normal reality. Peter returns to the present day and finds that his life has been restored to its original state. He is married to Lois again, and his children exist as they should in the proper timeline. However, one small change remains from his time travel adventures. Roger from American Dad now appears to be living with the Griffin family. This minor alteration suggests that time travel always leaves some small differences, even when major problems are fixed. The presence of Roger represents the idea that changing the past never restores things exactly as they were before. Some consequences always remain, even when the major problems are resolved. Summary: this Family Guy episode explores themes of regret, commitment, and the consequences of choices through Peter's time travel adventure to 1984. After hearing Quagmire's stories about single life, Peter wishes to experience being unmarried and cancels a date with young Lois to party instead. His actions create an alternate timeline where he married Molly Ringwald, Lois married Quagmire, and the world is actually better off. Despite the improved world, Peter cannot accept life without his original family and repeatedly tries to fix his mistakes, failing multiple times due to his inability to change his behavior. Eventually, he succeeds by demonstrating genuine passion and commitment to Lois, proposing marriage and restoring the timeline. The episode examines how grass is greener thinking can lead to poor decisions, while also showing that true love requires consistent commitment rather than just romantic gestures. The final twist, that time travel always leaves some small changes, even when major problems are resolved. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Valentine's Day in Quahog. The episode begins with a special Valentine's Day opening, after which Lois convinces Peter to spend the entire day together in bed. She thinks this romantic idea will bring them closer together and create a special bonding experience for their relationship. However, as Peter tries to make things romantic, Lois discovers that spending an entire day confined to their bedroom is not as wonderful as she had imagined. The forced intimacy becomes awkward and uncomfortable rather than naturally romantic. Their romantic day gets interrupted when Peter receives a phone call from a former girlfriend. This ex-girlfriend deliberately tries to cause problems between Peter and Lois, attempting to break up their marriage by reminding Peter of their past relationship. Meg's kidney date. Meg goes on a date with someone she met through the internet who told her she looks prettier than her profile picture. This compliment excites Meg because she rarely receives positive attention about her appearance from anyone. During their date, Meg and her companion discover they have several things in common, which makes her feel hopeful about finding someone who understands her. However, the date takes a disturbing turn when Meg gets knocked unconscious. She wakes up in a motel room to discover that her date has surgically removed one of her kidneys while she was unconscious. Despite this serious assault and theft of her organ, Meg holds him to his promise of spending a full day together. The man keeps his word and they continue their date for the entire day as promised. After their day out together, he returns Meg's kidney to her and they share a kiss before parting ways. Quagmire's gender curse. After a one-night stand, Quagmire's date places a curse on him, telling him that he will eventually get what he deserves for his treatment of women. This curse appears to be connected to his long history of sexual misconduct and disrespectful behavior toward women. Quagmire gets shocked by his date's tampon warmer, and afterward, everyone else sees him as a woman, even though he still sees himself as a man. The curse has changed other people's perception of his gender, while leaving his own self-image unchanged. Joe Swanson demonstrates the effectiveness of the curse by hitting on Quagmire, not recognizing him and seeing only an attractive woman. This proves that the curse has completely altered how others perceive Quagmire's appearance and gender. When Quagmire visits Dr. Hartman for help, the doctor wants to perform a pelvic exam on him, treating him as a female patient. Quagmire escapes from the doctor's office to avoid this uncomfortable medical procedure. Realizing that he has genuinely been cursed and cannot easily reverse the situation, Quagmire decides to make the best of his circumstances by becoming a lesbian and pursuing relationships with women while appearing female to others. Consuela and Herbert's storylines. Consuela sneaks across the border to reunite with her husband, showing her determination to be with her family despite immigration barriers. Her storyline involves the risks and sacrifices people make to maintain family relationships across national boundaries. Chris Griffin goes to collect paper money from Herbert, but during this visit, Herbert's grandniece sees Chris and becomes attracted to him. With coaching from Herbert, she approaches Chris and successfully asks him out on a date. Stewie's time travel romance. Stewie decides to experience what love was like in the 1960 seconds by traveling back in time to that era. During his time travel adventure, he meets and falls for a girl from that time period and decides to follow her around. When Stewie opens up emotionally and kisses the girl, he discovers that she is actually a young version of his mother Lois. This revelation horrifies him and he immediately throws up upon realizing he has romantically kissed his own mother. Stewie returns to the present day feeling disturbed by his experience, but Brian makes the situation worse by commenting on what happened. Brian's remarks add to Stewie's discomfort about his accidental romantic encounter with his mother. Brian's relationship analysis. Brian feels depressed about his consistent lack of success with romantic relationships and his pattern of failed relationships with women. His dating history shows a pattern of unsuccessful connections that leave him feeling lonely and frustrated. Stewie decides to help Brian understand why his relationships always fail by inviting all of Brian's former girlfriends to their house. He organizes a group discussion where the women can explain what went wrong in their relationships with Brian. During the meeting, Brian becomes angry and defensive when faced with criticism from his ex-girlfriends. Instead of listening to their feedback, he lashes out and begins criticizing them in return, showing his inability to accept responsibility. Brian's anger escalates until he turns on Stewie as well, despite Stewie's attempts to help him. In response, Stewie sends all the ex-girlfriends after Brian, and they chase him through the streets of Quahog. During the chase scene, they pass the Kool-Aid Man and his parents, who are waiting for his date with a bottle of Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink, adding surreal humor to the pursuit. Mayor West's love triangle. Mayor West discovers that his girlfriend Carol is spending time with another mayor, creating a romantic rivalry between the two municipal leaders. West becomes determined to win Carol back from his political and romantic competitor. West engages in a battle with the other mayor to compete for Carol's affections, ultimately succeeding in winning her back. However, Mayor McCheese also appears and hints that he has had his own romantic involvement with Carol. The episode's conclusion. The episode ends by showing how each character's Valentine's Day storyline concludes. Peter and Lois make passionate love while Peter fantasizes about cheating at his wedding with Lois's cousin's attractive date, showing his continued inappropriate thoughts. Mayor West prepares to cut a ribbon for the dedication of a statue of naked Carol, demonstrating his victory in winning her back. Chris and Herbert's grandniece share popsicles while Herbert watches them inappropriately. Consuela successfully returns to greet her family after her border crossing adventure. Stewie throws up again as Lois kisses him goodnight, still disturbed by his time travel romantic encounter with her younger self. Meg stores her returned kidney in her bedroom as a memento of what she considers her best date ever, despite the organ theft that occurred. Brian lies naked and smiling with every single one of his former girlfriends, suggesting a fantastical resolution to his relationship problems. Summary. This Family Guy Valentine's Day episode presents multiple interconnected romantic storylines that explore different aspects of love, relationships, and desire. Peter and Lois struggle with forced intimacy. Meg experiences romance, despite organ theft. Quagmire deals with a gender-changing curse. Stewie accidentally has romantic feelings for his mother through time travel, and Brian confronts his relationship failures. The episode combines dark humor with romantic themes, showing how Family Guy handles holiday episodes by subverting traditional romantic expectations with bizarre and often disturbing plot developments. Each storyline examines different types of dysfunction in relationships while maintaining the show's characteristic, irreverent approach to serious topics like love, commitment, and personal growth. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Passenger Fatty 7. Quagmire mentions taking his mother along on one of his flights and invites Peter, Joe, and Cleveland to join him on a trip to San Francisco. The friends accept his invitation and enjoy traveling together on the commercial flight that Quagmire pilots. During the return flight home, Quagmire invites his friends into the cockpit to show them how he operates the aircraft. The guys watch Quagmire work and come away with the mistaken impression that flying a plane is much easier than Quagmire makes it appear. Their visit to the cockpit gives them false confidence about aviation, as they do not understand the complex skills and training required to safely operate a commercial aircraft. They see only the surface actions without comprehending the years of education and experience behind them. The hijacking begins. When the co-pilot leaves the cockpit to use the restroom, terrorists take advantage of this moment to hijack the aircraft. The hijackers move quickly to take control of the plane while the co-pilot is away from his post. The co-pilot manages to close and secure the cockpit door before the hijackers can reach the flight controls. However, the terrorists threaten to begin executing passengers if their demands are not met, creating a life-or-death situation for everyone on board. Peter becomes the first passenger selected for execution by the hijackers. This immediate threat to his life motivates Joe and Cleveland to take action to save their friend and the other passengers. Joe and Cleveland slip away from the main cabin and make their way down to the cargo hold, where Joe has stored a gun in his luggage. Their plan involves retrieving the weapon to fight back against the terrorists. The counterattack. The hijackers notice that Joe and Cleveland have disappeared from the passenger cabin and become suspicious about their whereabouts. Peter and one of the terrorists go to investigate what happened to the missing passengers. In the cargo hold, Joe opens the landing gear hatch, which creates a dangerous situation as the aircraft is still in flight. Peter ends up fighting with the hijacker who came to investigate. putting both of them at risk. Cleveland helps end the fight by throwing a piece of luggage at the terrorist, knocking him unconscious. This teamwork between the friends helps them overcome one of the hijackers and gain an advantage in the situation. Returning to the main cabin, they successfully knock out the other hijackers who were threatening the passengers. Their coordinated effort appears to have ended the hijacking and saved everyone on board. The final hijacker. Just as the situation seems resolved, Quagmire opens the cockpit door and a fourth hijacker reveals himself. This final terrorist takes Quagmire at gunpoint and announces his intention to crash the plane into Las Vegas. The fourth hijacker settles into the pilot's seat, preparing to take control of the aircraft and carry out his deadly plan. His goal is to use the commercial plane as a weapon against the city below. However, Quagmire notices that the hijacker has not secured his seatbelt properly. This safety oversight gives Quagmire an opportunity to fight back without directly confronting the armed terrorist. Quagmire discreetly signals to the passengers in the cabin to fasten their seatbelts while he quietly secures his own. He then performs a sudden roll maneuver with the aircraft that throws the unsecured hijacker around the cockpit. The military response. The airplane roll successfully knocks out the final hijacker, but it also affects the passengers who failed to follow Quagmire's instructions to buckle up. Many passengers are also knocked unconscious by the sudden aircraft movement. With the plane's communication systems disabled by the hijackers, air traffic control cannot contact the aircraft. Military jets are scrambled to intercept what appears to be a hijacked plane that could pose a threat to populated areas. Peter tries to signal to the military pilots by waving at them, but he accidentally uses one of the hijackers' guns while doing so. The military pilots interpret this as a hostile gesture and begin attacking the commercial aircraft. Quagmire demonstrates his exceptional flying skills by dodging multiple missiles fired by the military jets. His expert maneuvering keeps the plane and its passengers alive despite the intense aerial combat. The emergency landing. Eventually, one of the military missiles strikes the commercial aircraft, causing significant damage to the plane's systems and structure. Despite the damage, Quagmire manages to maintain control of the aircraft. Using his years of training and experience, Quagmire successfully performs an emergency landing in a canyon. The difficult landing requires all of his piloting skills to avoid a crash that would kill everyone on board. The safe landing in challenging terrain proves Quagmire's exceptional abilities as a pilot to all the passengers and his friends. Everyone realizes that flying is much more difficult and dangerous than they had originally thought. The experience gives Peter, Joe, and Cleveland a new appreciation for Quagmire's professional skills and the complexity of aviation. They understand that their earlier impression about flying being easy was completely wrong. Summary: this Family Guy episode follows Peter, Joe, Cleveland, and Quagmire as their routine flight to San Francisco becomes a terrorist hijacking that tests Quagmire's piloting abilities. After the friends mistakenly believe flying is easy based on their cockpit visit, they must work together to defeat multiple hijackers who threaten to execute passengers and crash the plane into Las Vegas. Joe and Cleveland retrieve a gun from the cargo hold while Peter fights terrorists, but a final hijacker takes control until Quagmire uses an airplane roll to knock him unconscious. When military jets attack the plane due to disabled communications, Quagmire dodges missiles and performs an emergency landing in a canyon, proving his exceptional flying skills to his friends who gain new respect for the complexity and danger of aviation. The episode explores themes of professional expertise, teamwork under pressure, and how real-world crises reveal the true difficulty of jobs that may appear simple from the outside. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the pilot strike and Quagmire's new career. When airline pilots go on strike, Quagmire joins his fellow pilots on the picket line to demand better working conditions. While protesting outside the airport, he discovers a bachelorette party happening nearby and decides to entertain the celebrating women. The women at the bachelorette party start throwing cash at Quagmire for his dancing and entertaining performance. This easy money gives him the idea to become a professional stripper, seeing an opportunity to earn income while the pilot strike continues. Quagmire begins working at a strip club but makes excuses to avoid spending time with Peter, Joe, and Cleveland. His friends become suspicious about his mysterious absences and decide to follow him to discover what he's really doing. When Peter, Joe, and Cleveland find Quagmire working as a stripper, Peter accuses him of prostitution. Quagmire denies selling sexual services, but then some female customers actually offer him money for intimate encounters, tempting him to cross that line. Quagmire's descent into prostitution. Quagmire begins accepting money from women for sexual services, essentially becoming a male prostitute. However, one customer refuses to pay him after their encounter, leaving him without the money he was promised for his services. When Peter picks up the stranded Quagmire, who has no cash for transportation, Peter intervenes with the customer and successfully collects the money owed. Quagmire gives Peter a cut of the payment as thanks for helping him get paid. This arrangement leads to Peter becoming Quagmire's pimp, managing his bookings and taking a percentage of his earnings. Peter aggressively schedules multiple appointments for Quagmire, treating him like a business rather than a friend. Peter's constant bookings exhaust Quagmire, who tries to take a break from the demanding schedule. However, Peter refuses to let him rest, prioritizing profits over Quagmire's well-being and health. Peter's abusive management. Peter becomes increasingly abusive toward Quagmire, pushing him to work with more customers and forcing him to accept clients he finds repulsive. Peter treats Quagmire like property rather than a person, showing no concern for his comfort or dignity. The situation reaches a dangerous point when a customer wants Quagmire to participate in disturbing activities described as German things. This encounter finally makes Peter realize how badly he has been treating his friend. Peter intervenes to protect Quagmire from the dangerous customer and recognizes the serious trouble his friend has been experiencing. He agrees to end their business relationship and return to being friends instead of pimp and prostitute. When Quagmire expresses hope that the pilot strike will end soon so he can return to his real job, Peter reveals shocking news. The strike actually ended a month ago, but the notification was sent to the wrong email address, meaning Quagmire could have returned to work long ago. Brian's insurance crisis. Meanwhile, Brian discovers that he is no longer covered by Peter's health insurance plan and must find his own job to get medical coverage. This forces him into the unfamiliar world of employment and working for wages. Brian gets hired at Mega Hardware Store, where his personality completely changes to match what he thinks a handyman should act like. However, he lacks the actual skills and knowledge needed to back up his new tough guy attitude. At work, Brian dismisses customers rudely and annoys his coworkers with his fake handyman personality. His behavior creates problems for the store and makes him unpopular with both customers and fellow employees. Back home, Brian's insufferable new attitude irritates Stewie, who decides to get Brian fired from his job. Stewie develops a plan to sabotage Brian's employment at the hardware store. Stewie's sabotage plan. Stewie recruits a group of Hispanic handymen to teach him about tools and construction work. He wants to learn enough about the trade to effectively sabotage Brian's job performance. As part of his plan, Stewie plants a shaken-up can of soda with Brian's name on it where Brian's boss will find it. The exploding soda creates a mess that gets blamed on Brian, achieving Stewie's goal of getting him fired. When Brian confronts Stewie and demands that he admit to the sabotage, Brian tries to physically lift Stewie in anger. However, this action causes Brian to rupture a hernia, creating a medical emergency. Stewie is forced to perform surgery on Brian's hernia, giving detailed instructions during the procedure. During this medical crisis, Brian demonstrates actual working knowledge of tools by following Stewie's surgical directions properly. Brian's competent use of surgical tools impresses Stewie, who realizes that Brian does have some practical skills after all. This medical emergency shows Brian's true abilities rather than his fake handyman personality. Summary. This Family Guy episode explores themes of exploitation, false identity, and economic desperation through two parallel storylines. Quagmire's journey from striking pilot to stripper to prostitute shows how financial pressure can lead people into dangerous situations, while Peter's transformation from friend to abusive pimp demonstrates how money can corrupt relationships. Brian's fake handyman persona at his hardware store job illustrates how people sometimes adopt false identities when facing new challenges, though his real competence emerges during a medical crisis. Both stories examine how economic necessity can push people to compromise their values and authentic selves, while also showing how true friendship and genuine skills eventually emerge despite temporary deceptions and exploitation. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Teagues for 2. Peter gets very mad when his dry cleaner loses his favorite white shirt. He gets much angrier than most people would about a lost piece of clothing. Peter yells and acts crazy about something that is really not that important. Peter tries to tell Lois to find a different dry cleaner, but she says no. Instead, Lois tells Peter he should invite the dry cleaner to their house for dinner to talk about the problem nicely. Lois makes things worse by trying to force Peter to say sorry to the dry cleaner. This makes Peter even madder because he does not think he did anything wrong. Peter keeps saying the dry cleaner stole his shirt on purpose instead of just losing it by accident. He thinks the man is a thief rather than someone who made a mistake. Breaking into the house. Peter breaks into the dry cleaner's house to look for his missing shirt. This is a serious crime, but Peter does it anyway because he is so angry about his lost clothing. Inside the house, Peter finds a white shirt in the man's closet. He thinks this proves the dry cleaner stole his shirt. When the dry cleaner comes home and finds Peter in his house, he gets a gun to protect himself. Peter holds up the white shirt and says it belongs to him, but when he tries to put the shirt on, he finds out it is too small for his body. This proves the shirt is not his, but Peter will not admit he was wrong. The dry cleaner wants to shoot Peter for breaking into his house, but Peter refuses to take off the shirt. The dry cleaner does not want to shoot because it would ruin his shirt. Instead of shooting, the dry cleaner fights Peter with his hands. He beats up Peter, and then Peter gets arrested for breaking into someone's house. Brian meets Denise. Brian waits at the jail to help Peter get out. While there, he meets a woman named Denise who got arrested for protesting against a new Walmart store. She does not like big stores taking over small towns. Brian tries to impress Denise by talking about politics and showing how smart he island, but Denise does not seem very interested in him, which makes Brian feel bad. When Brian asks Denise to go on a date with him, she says no. This makes Brian very upset, and he has a complete breakdown because a woman rejected him. Learning from Quagmire. Peter tells Brian he should ask Quagmire for help with women. Brian takes a class where Quagmire teaches men how to pick up girls and get them to like you quickly. Brian tries to use Quagmire's methods with Denise, but they make things much worse. Quagmire's ways of talking to women are rude and only work for quick hookups, not real relationships. Quagmire tells Brian that his methods are only for getting sex quickly, not for building lasting love with someone. This explains why his advice does not help Brian, who wants a real girlfriend. Using Cheryl against Quagmire. Brian decides to copy Quagmire's mean dating style and picks up Cheryl Teagues, who used to date Quagmire. Brian treats Cheryl badly just like Quagmire taught him, while Quagmire watches and cannot stop it. This makes Quagmire angry because he has to watch Brian be cruel to someone he once cared about. It shows Quagmire how his own dating methods hurt women. Quagmire gets revenge by bringing Jillian, Brian's ex-girlfriend, to dinner with Brian and Cheryl. This creates a fight between Brian and Quagmire while their dates watch. The restaurant fight. At the restaurant, Brian finds out that Quagmire tricked Jillian into dating him by taking advantage of her being not very smart. This makes Brian angry because Jillian cannot protect herself from being used. Brian and Quagmire start calling each other names and fighting at the dinner table. Their argument gets so bad that it ruins dinner for everyone. Both Cheryl and Jillian get disgusted with how Brian and Quagmire are acting and leave the restaurant. The women refuse to be part of their stupid fight. Fake making up. Outside the restaurant, Brian finds Quagmire waiting for his car. Quagmire admits he only dated Jillian to make Brian mad, not because he really liked her. Brian says his relationship with Cheryl probably would not have worked anyway because he was only dating her to get back at Quagmire. Both men seem to understand they were being stupid. Brian thinks they are friends again and asks Quagmire for a ride home. Quagmire smiles and acts like he agrees to help Brian. But when Brian tries to get in the car, Quagmire drives forward fast and then backs up, hitting Brian with his car. This shows Quagmire is still angry and has not really forgiven Brian. Summary. This Family Guy episode shows how small problems can turn into big fights when people let their anger control them. Peter gets so mad about a lost shirt that he breaks into someone's house and gets arrested. Brian gets so upset about being rejected that he starts treating women badly to get revenge. Both Peter and Brian make their problems much worse by acting crazy instead of handling things calmly. The episode teaches that getting too angry about small things and trying to hurt people back usually just makes everything worse for everyone involved. If you liked today's video, please hit subscribe and I will see you in the next one.